Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Nevada Sentencing Commission meeting today, May 21st, 2021. I apologize to everyone in advance for holding a meeting in the final days of the legislative session, but as I had explained in the last meeting, we're required to hold these meetings consistent with statute, and the timing isn't always our choice. But we'll be cognizant of the demands that I know exist on various people who may have to attend hearings. And so if that's the case, I would just ask if you let us know so that the staff can mark your absence for a brief period, and then hopefully you'll be able to return. In addition to having Victoria and her staff here today present, it's really an honor to have the vice chair, Chuck Calloway, present. It's the first time I think Chuck and I have seen each other in person in over a year. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to have a in-person meeting of the commission maybe later this year. And you'll get the same treatment he got. I gave him a hug, so I'm looking forward to giving all of you a hug too. So let's get started and we'll move through our agenda. So if you would, Victoria, please call the roll.
Mr. Ariscata?
Present.
Ms. Brady?
Present.
Director Cafarata?
I'm here.
Director Daniels?
Present.
Chairman DeRico?
Here.
Judge Freeman? Mr. Hicks?
Present.
Mr. Imlay?
Present.
Dr. Lanterman?
Present.
Chief Lawson? Sheriff Logan?
Present.
Mr. Marsh? Mr. McCormick?
Present.
Ms. Mull? Sorry, was that Ms. Mull? Dr. Neighbors?
She's here. Present.
Thank you. Mr. Ponder? Judge Villani? Ms. Wellborn?
Present.
Assemblywoman Nguyen? Senator Canizaro? Senator Pickard? Vice Chair Calloway?
Here.
And Chair Hardesty.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, great. The first order of business is to open the first period of public comment consistent with the practices we've been operating under for the past year. There are two periods of public comment, one at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end. Members of the public have two options for submitting public comment. First, members may do so in writing by emailing the department at sentencingpolicy@ndsp.nv.gov. Public comment received in writing will be provided to the commission and included by reference in the minutes of the meeting. My understanding, Ms. Gonzalez, is that there were no written comments prior to today's meeting.
There were, we've had several submitted and they've been posted to the
Okay.
website and included with the meeting materials for the members of the commission.
Okay, great. I did not see mine, so I'll look at those. Members of the public who wish to testify may also do so by phone. And so due to time constraints, however, we're limited to 2 minutes. So any member of the public that exceeds that time frame, we also encourage you to submit additional comments in writing to the Department of Sentencing. Ms. Buckley, you want to proceed with inviting members of the public to participate?
Thank you, Chair Hardesty. Members of the public who would like to testify by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. When it is your turn to speak, please slowly state and spell your first and last name. Don't have it. Chair Hardesty, at this time, we don't have anybody in the waiting room or with a raised hand to make public comment.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Buckley. We'll proceed then with item 3 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the meeting of February 19th. Are there any edits, comments, or corrections to the draft minutes?
Justice Hardesty,
Yes, Ms. Wellborn.
I plan to abstain from this vote as I was not present.
Okay, understood. Is there a is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Sheriff, motion made by Sheriff Logan. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, Mr. Arascata, I think you responded first. You'll second it. Any comment on the motion? Since we have screens here, rather than a roll call, if everybody would raise your hand with respect to those who are in favor. And are there any who are opposed? The minutes are, excuse me, and Ms. Wellborn is abstaining. Is there anybody else who wishes to abstain?
I would like to abstain. I was not here also.
All right. Mr. Callaway and Ms. Wellborn are listed as abstentions. The meeting minutes are approved otherwise. Let's open agenda item 4. I was kidding Ms. Gonzalez, our executive director, about the length of her report, but it is substantive and important for all of us to catch up. She and her staff have been extraordinarily busy. So I'll extend to Ms. Gonzalez the opportunity to proceed with her report.
Thank you, Chair. I have prepared a presentation, as the Chair mentioned, for my report today. I am going to share that so that if you're interested. Also, it's been provided in your meeting material, so if you would like to follow along. As I have previously done for my reports, I have organized my summary of the department's activities by the core functions of the department. On slide 1, I have some highlights regarding the administrative core function and the budget core function. As you can see, our infrastructure, as far as are we concerned, is fully established. We are able to conduct day-to-day activities of an agency, and we are now fully staffed. Importantly, Monica Chiazza joined our team recently, and as you can see from the work we have done, she has been able to jump right in and work with us and be able to help us keep moving things along. To accomplish our statutory mandates, I've identified key areas or subject matters within the department and then assigned staff to each of these areas. As many of you know, within state agencies, staff have formal titles, but based on the assigned area of expertise I have identified within our department, I have given them what I'm calling their quote unquote real titles that represent what they contribute to the department. Laura Arnold is our research specialist. Rhonda Buckley is our administrative specialist. And Monica Chiazza is our data specialist. In our budget core function, just as an update regarding our budget, for fiscal year 21, we were appropriated $438,988 for the fiscal year. And this is after the required reductions resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic were taken. We are currently on a track to revert some of these funds in our travel and salary categories. And these reversions are due totally to impacts from restrictions from the COVID-19 pandemic, which limited our ability to travel. And then the normal salary savings that occur when we are in between hiring when a vacancy occurs within our department. Here is a summary of what we have done in our commission core function. Our activities in this core function are focused on organizing, executing, and closing commission meetings. This includes preparing agenda, meeting materials, and transcribing minutes. I have an important update about our membership. As we can see, since our last meeting of the commission, Holly Wellborn from the ACLU has been appointed to the commission. Welcome, Ms. Wellborn. And I know that the chair and the rest of us are very happy to have you here. Additionally, the commission currently has one legislative vacancy, and this vacancy will most likely remain vacant until the end of the current meeting cycle. The current meeting cycle of the commission will be ending on July 31st, 2021. The 2-year appointments of the commission members align with the meeting cycle, which means the appointments of our current members will end on July 31st, 2021. This will include those who were appointed to fill the vacancy of a member that was appointed back in 2019. Starting at the end of June and the beginning of July, staff will begin soliciting appointments for the next meeting cycle. We'll be reaching out to the appointing authorities. For those of you who may be interested in serving another appointment, could keep in contact with your appointing authority regarding appointments for the next cycle, which will begin on August 1st, 2021. Another update I wanted to let the commission know about, it was in regards to the open meeting law. On June 1st, 2021, the requirements of the open meeting law were suspended in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the governor suspended several requirements of the open meeting law. One of the requirements that was suspended was the requirement that a public body have a physical location for a meeting where members of the public are permitted to attend and testify. The suspension of this requirement allowed for public bodies to hold meetings in a virtual format like this one. Starting June 1st, the suspension of this requirement expires. Assembly Bill number 253 of this session codifies several changes to the open meeting law that were in effect during the pandemic, including the change to the physical location requirement. The bill provides that a public body provide a physical location or means to attend by a remote technology system. The effective date of 253 is passage and approval. This means when AB 253 is passed and signed by the governor, the commission will still be able to hold meetings via Zoom. Next slide is a summary and highlights of what's happening in the AB 236 core function. We have some exciting updates about the Nevada Local Justice Reinvestment Coordinating Council. If you go to our website, you can see a list of the most updated appointments to the council. At this point, we only need 4 more appointments from 4 counties. We are aware that an additional appointment was made yesterday, and we are going to confirm that as well and update our website when that is confirmed. Based on the plan that has been proposed to this commission, the chair of the council will be appointed at the September meeting of the Sentencing Commission by the chair. And our plan for the coordinating council is to hold the first meeting in September. I first want to thank Laura from our staff who took the lead on communicating with the counties to solicit these appointments. And I want to thank all the counties for working with us and getting their appointments to us in a timely manner. The appointments are due to us by July 1st, and as you can tell, we are right on track to get those. Among other things, the council is tasked with informing the commission about the impact of AB 236 at the local level. Along with recommendations from the chair and this commission, I recommend the first meeting of the council include initial discussions of this impact from AB 236 at the local level and maybe a data inventory of each county to learn what kinds of criminal justice data they collect and report. As you note next on our slide, we have begun a project to identify practical and physical impacts of implementing the technical violations, graduated sanctions, and temporary revocations from the provisions of AB 236. The preliminary information we have is specific to parole. As we know, I want to let this commission know that this topic has come up in our meeting with agencies and stakeholders. Additionally, discussions about these provisions came up at the previous meeting of the commission back in February. The Sentencing Commission is tasked with evaluating outcomes resulting from the enactment of AB 236, and the provisions related to the technical violations, graduated sanctions, and temporary revocations is another area where we can gather information and data and assist the commission in evaluating these outcomes and enacting these provisions and policies. We look forward to presenting our findings, our data at future meetings of the Sentencing Commission, and we will include information as it relates to probation as well. Next, we are refining our methodologies and assisting the commission in identifying savings and reinvestment as it relates to the prison population. Previously, the commission discussed the methodology for identifying savings. Director Daniels asked us to work with his staff on getting more information at the institutional level to contextualize these savings, which we have been working on since. You can see we are now collecting data to track admissions and releases on a regular basis. And we are also collecting data by institution to start gathering information that will be relevant and helpful to providing that context when analyzing savings. Related to that is the reinvestment piece that is important to AB 236. The commission is tasked with making recommendations for reinvestment. To better inform any recommendations that are developed by the commission, I thought it might be helpful for the commission to be aware of certain programs that have been funded and that might be considered reinvestment. For example, the governor's recommended budget highlighted funding for the Going Home Prepared program. My pedestrian understanding of the program is that it assists certain parolees who need assistance with housing for release, but I will gather more information about this. Additionally, Assembly Bill 358 is related to assisting inmates in completing applications for Medicaid. There was a fiscal note submitted by NDOC concerning the cost it would be to assist inmates in completing their Medicaid applications so that they have proper treatment upon release. It is possible that this might be considered reinvestment as well, as AB 236 required NDOC to assist inmates in being prepared and applying for Medicaid as part of their release program. Even broader, any programs, agencies, or treatment that might provide assistance or support for reentry that receive funding during the legislative session could be considered reinvestment. If this commission would like more information about this, we can provide a full report at a future meeting. Next is our reports and data core functions. What we have here is what we've identified, a goal for establishing a criminal justice data hub. We are working to assist the commission in fulfilling mandates related to criminal justice data. And we hope by building and establishing and adding data to this criminal justice data hub, it will assist the commission. We will take data that has been submitted to the department and that is publicly available and start storing it within our department. We hope that this data storage will evolve into a database and maybe even a dashboard that would be available on our website. Of course, this will be dependent on staffing and technological resources. We will also identify key metrics, sources for those metrics, and provide that information in the hub. The hub would also include information about where gaps of data have been identified. Any information that we have would be available on our website, and we would have key findings and visualizations. Additionally, we hope to publish these in what we are calling now a data digest. The data digest, data storage, and future database and dashboard will assist the commission for making recommendations and also provide important information to the public regarding the criminal justice data that is available in our state. we've also been working on what we call a supplement to the AB 236 report. We met with agencies and stakeholders, and we will discuss this in an agenda item later on in the meeting. Finally, related to this core function, our activities is our collaboration with CJI related to the COVID-19 project, which they will be also presenting on later on in this meeting. In the legislative core function, obviously we've been very busy. We have been tracking legislation relevant to the duties of the department and the commission. We then have organized the track bills into categories and provided regular updates to this commission. The categories that we have created at this point for organizing priority legislation is programs and reentry, impact to prison population, criminal justice data, corrections costs, AB 236, and anything related to the administration of either our department or the commission. In our legislative activities, I wanted to provide some specific examples of what we have done. In tracking legislation, we've looked for opportunities to submit amendments that would ensure that the commission and the department receive certain reports. These reports include criminal justice data that are relevant to the duties of the commission and the department. Examples of this are an amendment that was submitted for Assembly Bill 125, which would ensure that the Department of Sentencing Policy receives the report of those who qualify for the credits that would be granted in that bill. Additionally, I submitted an amendment for Senate Bill 401 to ensure that our department received a report related to data that is collected for pretrial release, which may help the commission in additional recommendations it seeks to make. And finally, in our legislative activities is a significant project we've taken on related to the cost savings analysis of Assembly Bill 125 and AB 241. As you can see, at one point during session, we were asked if we could identify any cost savings that might result from the enactment of Assembly Bill 125. We took this project on and engaged and collaborated with all the agencies that would be impacted by the enactment of the legislation. I have included a visualization in the materials of the commission. They were available on the website of some of our findings so far and how we took on this analysis. We looked at how many possible inmates would be available for parole, looked at the current grant rate, looked at impacts, looked at then based on that grant rate, who then might be subject to supervision. In order to enact AB 125, the agencies submitted fiscal notes that represented the fiscal impact that they would experience in order to enact the legislation. We evaluated the fiscal notes, the potential costs and the impacts, and put together the visual that's been included in your materials to properly or to project the possible outcomes of what could happen, not only to the agencies, but fiscally for the agencies and to the state as it would result from this legislation. Our biggest takeaway from this is that we are learning how to evaluate and analyze the cost and practical impacts of any legislation or any changes like this to policies as they relate to the prison population. We are looking forward to improving our methodology. As we know, this has been an ongoing project since the commission started meeting and since AB 236 went into effect, as one of the mandates is to evaluate those cost savings. We look forward to continuing to refining our methodology, and we'll keep the commission updated on our activities in this area. In the outreach core function, I want to provide an update on the information we have received from the public as we continue to be a source for the public to share their interests and concerns as it relates to sentencing policy. Since our last meeting, here's a summary of the information we have received. I will note that any request we received to be included as public comment, that number on the slide here and then in the report says 17. It is actually 14. And as I mentioned, those submissions were provided to the commission with meeting materials and can be reviewed on our website. The last thing I wanted to mention in the outreach core function was a trip that we took to go meet with NDOC staff. We visited the Ely State Prison, and we visited Florence McClure. One of the things that's very important in our gathering information and context for the commission is understanding how our criminal justice system works. The staff at NDOC has been very welcome and opening and letting us see the facility so that we can truly understand this part of the criminal justice system. We would like to do the same with other stakeholders and agencies throughout the state, and we'll continue to reach out to those individuals. If there's any member of this commission that has a recommendation for either a visit we could do, a sit along, or a ride along that will continue to help us have a full understanding of the criminal justice system, we welcome that and look forward to those opportunities with meeting everybody throughout the state. Next, I am going to turn the presentation over to Laura, who will provide an update on some of our case law tracking.
Thank you, Director Gonzalez. Good morning, commission members. For the record, I'm Laura Arnold, staff attorney for the Nevada Department of Sentencing Policy. At the beginning of 2021, the department began tracking the advanced opinions issued by the Nevada Court of Appeals and the Nevada Supreme Court for any case law that might be of interest or relevant to the work of the commission or otherwise assist the commission in making recommendations in the future. To date, there have been 3 cases published in 2021 that stand out. The first case is State v. 4th Judicial District Court, advanced opinion number 4, published on February 25th, 2021. This case concerns criminal charges And in particular, the Supreme Court made a determination that a felon in possession of a firearm or firearms commits a single violation of NRS 202.360 subsection 1B, regardless of the number of firearms in the felon's possession. The second case is Sewall v. 8th Judicial District Court, Advanced Opinion number 9, published on March 4th, 2021. Sewall concerns pretrial release and concluded that the state's evidence of the defendant's first-degree murder was insufficient to defeat the defendant's right to reasonable bail under the Nevada Constitution because that evidence did not tend to demonstrate that the defendant committed the elements of first-degree murder. Finally, the third case is Hilt v. 8th Judicial District Court, Advanced Opinion number 12, published on March 25th, 2021. At issue in Hilt was retroactivity jurisprudence, specifically in reference to a jury trial in a qualifying misdemeanor case. The Nevada Supreme Court vacated the defendant's misdemeanor conviction for domestic battery based on the retroactive application of Anderson v. 8th Judicial District Court, 135 Nevada 321, 448 P. 3rd, 1120, published in 2019. In Anderson, the Nevada Supreme Court determined that defendants charged with a misdemeanor domestic battery offense are entitled to a jury trial. The defendant in Hilt was entitled to retroactive application of Anderson because Anderson announced a new constitutional rule of criminal procedure that was decided before the defendant's conviction in Hilt became final.
Thank you, Laura. So to conclude, these are the highlights after that lengthy report, which I appreciate being able to share and celebrate all of our activities and our accomplishments since our last meeting cycle and really since the establishment of the department. So again, things that the commission and the public can look forward to is our criminal justice data hub, which will be available on our website as we continue to update that and build that. We are looking forward to publishing what we're calling the data digests. We will provide a full legislative update at the September meeting of the commission to give the commission an update on the legislation that was actually passed, the possible impacts of that, and highlight anything the commission may want to investigate or get additional information on. And then, of course, we've got the new meeting cycle coming up from the commission, which will begin August 1st, and we will be soliciting appointments for that soon. With that, we are happy to answer any questions that the commission may have. And I'll note that if you have questions, I have numbered the slides. A couple of them are out of order, I admit. And so just mention that if you have a question specific to that slide. And Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Ms. Arnold, for your reports. Are there any questions from commission members for the executive director at this time?
I have a question. Yes, Charles. Thank you. My question is regarding the slide regarding AB 125 cost savings. And I don't have the data in front of me today, but I'd be happy to provide it to the commission. We found when we released certain offenders at CCDC because of the COVID pandemic and our depopulation, that a significant number of those folks that were released ended up reoffending and getting placed back in our custody. And so I'm curious if the cost savings that's being evaluated for those 725 offenders that were granted parole, if it's also taking into account if any of them were reoffended and back in the system, and how that affects the cost savings. Because obviously, if they would have otherwise been in custody, but they were released early and then they're reoffending, there may not be the whole cost savings that on the surface it would appear. So that's the question.
Thank you. Victoria Gonzalez for the record. So if I understand, are you talking, just to clarify, the reoffending of those who would be released or the possible reoffending of those that are released and then come back?
I'm looking specifically at if they were released early, either due to AB 236 or AB 125, and then they reoffend and they're back in custody again. If we're looking at strictly the cost savings because they're not taking up a prison bed or a jail bed on the front end because they were released, but in fact they're back in taking up a jail bed, so there's really not the cost savings we may be claiming there is, if that makes sense.
It does. So for the record, Victoria Gonzalez, thank you very much for that question, Vice Chair Callaway. That is one of the things that is incredibly complicated when it comes to trying to identify savings. There are practical impacts of what we're used to seeing in the criminal justice system. And so as much as we can here, we've tried to add those caveats. One thing that I had noted here was that, so AB 125 applies credits specifically to certain B felons. And so what we did is we looked up the recidivism rate currently, as was reported for the 2016 cohort for category B felons. And what we've noted here is that it's 21%. So we could do additional calculations where we take this population and then calculate that percentage and then say, based on the current recidivism rate, this is a potential returns we could see. What I think is incredibly interesting about this project and taking something on like this is, from what I can tell, the state's never really engaged in this kind of projection and discussion. And so whatever happens with AB 125, I see this as an opportunity for us to really figure out, how do we calculate these things? And what we've got here are these is what I would call key metrics for what we're measuring. And when I've discussed either with stakeholders or with the legislators, I see this as, we don't know. So give us, if this bill passes, what we would do is continue to collect data, including the recidivism rate, including the types of offenses we see coming back, including what the actual grant rate of these individuals are, and then try and zero in on how we calculate savings. You can see here, we used the daily inmate average. That's an average daily cost. But as many of us know who talk about the cost of corrections, that daily rate varies from institution. Some institutions, it costs them $80 a day. Some it costs $35. And so I think, to your point, that bed is not just a bed. And it's a discussion that's come up before, and I think it's very difficult to capture. But I promise that whatever we do with this analysis is we're looking to capture all of that. And I appreciate that point. And like I say, I see this as a framework of, here's the type of data we're going to collect. And we intend to continue to drill down on these cost savings so that neither the commission nor the public is misled about what it actually costs to incarcerate anyone. And I'll say my focus of this really was to show the impact of the agencies, by emphasizing, here's what it's going to cost DOC to even calculate the sentences. And yes, we're talking about possibly empty beds at that point, but then look at what it costs parole to handle additional hearings, and then parole and probation to supervise those individuals. And to your point, if they come back, we're looking at possibly more costs to process, admit anyone that comes back. So I appreciate, and that's our thinking and approaching this and where we would start. So I appreciate the input.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Any other questions for Ms. Gonzalez on her report? Ms. Wellborn?
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay, I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Callaway.
Well, sure. This is a discussion time.
Okay,
Sure.
perfect. So really more of a request. So I would like to see, and I think for, the committee might be interested in seeing the categories of offenses, that align with whomever may have been released during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we can kind of get that bigger picture. I'm also interested, in some of the conversations back when we talked about AB 236. I think there was always the reality that we faced that there would be at least, some, recognition that people might recidivate. That's the nature of individuals when they reenter society, the, amount of resources that we provided for individuals that, of course, they might reenter the system. So I'd be interested in knowing and following, what type of offense that may have been, what the circumstances could have been for that individual, because I think that that's, part of this larger calculus when we're considering what policies we're going to recommend to future legislatures. So, I'd be very interested in seeing that. And also perhaps Ms. McNamara, if it's okay, she might be intending to address this later on in this conversation, but I'd be interested in knowing, how that weighed into the conversation and the negotiations of AB 236, just to remind some of the committee members who may not have been an integral part of that process.
Can I answer, Mr.
Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
So thank you, Ms. Wellborn, for the question, and I will get that data for the commission because just recently I was on the call with Quentin and our chief from CCDC, and he had mentioned that we had tracked that data, so I'd be happy to provide it. And there's also a study that our captain had done at the Convention Center Area Command, which is currently in a draft stage waiting approval. But I think it's relevant to this discussion, even though it's not specific to NDOC. But we have seen a disturbing trend where violent offenders who in some cases have committed attempted murder or assault with a deadly weapon against someone, in particular in our resort corridor, who within a day or two are back out on the street and engaged in other violent behavior. And we have those cases that we have tracked as well. And we did a study on that, which, as I said, is currently in the draft stage. And as soon as that study is approved by the sheriff, I'd be happy to provide it to the Sentencing Commission as well.
Great. Let me ask Mr. Hicks if he is aware of any similar studies or evaluation either by the sheriff's department or his department in Washoe County.
Specifically studies to address, I'm sorry, what specifically?
The recidivate or recidivisms by category and individuals who were released during the course of the pandemic, or as Chuck just mentioned, a tracking, if you will, of those who are arrested for violent crimes and are released on either bail or their own recognizance and recidivate soon after having been released.
Thank you. There's not a study on point with that I could reference going on. So we're not tracking them right now. I do think that there's mechanisms to do that through the uniform crime reporting statistics and different avenues like that. But I do think it would be valuable information.
Perhaps we can check with Ms. Noble also when she provides her report on the subaward work that's being done in your office, Mr. Hicks, and we can expand the scope of work in that process.
Yeah, it's certainly something we'd like to look at. And there's so many different data points that are relevant in this discussion. So she'll explain later, but we are trying to track similar type of data.
Great. I applaud the department's effort here. They're trying to get a full picture, not just a partial picture of the costs associated with these bills. And there are, as Ms. Wellborn and you have recognized, Chuck, recidivism activity that should be part of the calculus. So are there any other questions for the director with respect to the content of her report?
Yes. I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Jones-Brady, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, Chair. I have a question about when we get this data, are we going to make sure that we are able to drill down and make correlations, for example, between programs that these people are or are not able to access? Will we be able to say, like, this person was on a waiting list for a bed at a treatment center and never got in and then recidivated and, or committed a new crime? Are we going to be able to get that kind of data? Because right now we had AB 236, but we still, are lacking in, treatment services, mental health services. All of those things have waiting lists and there are access issues. So that would be one thing I'd be interested in seeing, is not just who's recidivating and that sort of thing, but the kinds of things that they were trying to get into. Were they able to get a job, et cetera, things like that. And if not, what are the impediments so that we can apply for grants or attribute money that comes in for services in the future to needed areas that will help reduce recidivism?
So great question. I'll ask the director to respond, but we're getting pretty granular when we get into those kinds of inquiries. tracking an inmate from one bed to the next is going to be pretty difficult. But Ms. Arnold or Ms. Gonzalez, any comment?
Yes, thank you. For the record, Victoria Gonzalez. Thank you, Ms. Brady. You bring up another point of this whole picture that we're trying to capture. And I think what the first thought that comes to my mind is how much that goes into whatever we identify as, quote unquote savings. If we're looking to make sure that there's certain housing or treatment or programs or whatever it is they may need. And I think what's important for our approach with anything that we're collecting is we all know we don't have one statewide database to get information. But one thing that we've absolutely leaned into is that there are various sources for data. And so when we're looking to make conclusions, those conclusions are going to be based on a variety of sources of data, which is kind of my point when I get to identifying that our criminal justice data hub. So if we do have a key metric that we want to start collecting data that's related to recidivism. And I think while it may be difficult specific to this project, which I'm not going to try. It's good. I'm definitely going to look into, but I think in general, we could look at related data. And I think if we're able to get some data in general about what can we track with who's been able to get Medicaid, what can we track with who's been able to get a proper ID. And I think if we just see how those programs are going over here off to the side, and we look at this information over here, while it's not a perfect assessment and perfect conclusions about what's happening, it does tell you what's happening in the state. And so I think to your point, we would be happy when we're gathering information and have some information for you in general about what's happening, and continue to add that to our list of here's data we want to know, and here's what we're adding that we think is important to know. And so I think there will be a way to provide you some information about that, even if it's not specific to maybe these individuals. We'll be able to tell you what's going on with what are the drivers of the recidivism.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Dr. Lanneman.
Hi, so I'd like to just follow up on some comments made, sort of related comments made by Vice Chair Callaway and Ms. Jones-Brady. There are certain types of offenses that we refer to as high base rate offenses. So these are types of crimes that are frequently committed. So they're just much higher frequency. So typically the lower the severity, the more likely they are to be repeated. And so these are the individuals that, sort of contrary to popular thought, are actually the individuals who have the highest risk score. So if you're looking at like risk and needs assessments, people who commit relatively minor property offenses, who have a history of substance use disorder, actually tend to have much higher risk scores than, say, somebody who has committed a really serious violent offense. So when we're thinking about people being released for any reason, but in this context, relative to COVID, you would absolutely expect people who have been charged with or convicted of relatively minor offenses, or comparatively minor offenses, to be much more likely to reoffend than other people. So it's really important to keep track of these instances where you do have people who have been charged with or convicted of very serious crimes who are reoffending, what we call short time to failure. So really quickly after release. That's really important to keep track of, because that's fairly anomalous. So we need to figure out what's going on there. But with individuals who commit these high base rate offenses, particularly if they are living with certain types of criminogenic needs like active substance use disorder, you absolutely cannot, there's no real reason to expect that they will not reoffend if they don't actually have an intervention program that is targeting their particular criminogenic need. So while those data are difficult to track, there is a real significant difference between an individual who, say, has been convicted of a property crime and is living with substance use disorder, and is released and has access to treatment. An individual who's been convicted with a property of a property crime who has substance use disorder is released and does not have access to treatment, and an individual who is convicted of a property crime and does not have a substance use disorder and is released, right? So there are some really significant differences across those groups, and we can't really thoroughly understand or contextualize that reoffending behavior if we don't have the information about their access to or engagement with programming in the community. So, I mean, this is a perennial problem with community data relative to community-based programming, but it's actually really important for us to understand what's going on. So we would do well to invest the resources that are available to us to actually figuring that out.
Thank you, Doctor, for that input. All good points. I think, Chuck, the reports you're talking about are focused on tracking offenses
Yes.
as part of that. Okay, great. Any other questions or comments associated with the director's presentation? All right, then let's move to agenda item number 5. Good morning, Director Daniels and your team. Members of the commission, we received a PowerPoint and we'll put it on the screen here. Director, if you're ready to proceed, we appreciate your presence and your team's presence and your input today. If you'd like to begin.
Good morning, Chief Justice Hardesty, Vice Chair Callaway, and members of the Sentencing Commission. This is Charles Daniels, Director of the Nevada Department of Corrections. First, I want to thank the Commission for providing me with an opportunity to present information about the Nevada Department of Corrections. My executive team and I will present and discuss via PowerPoint slideshow the impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on our agency. We will present an informative timeline commencing with the onset of the pandemic in February 2020 to present. Please feel free to ask questions at the conclusion of the presentation. I have several members of my executive team that will be chiming in during certain portions of it. So down in my Las Vegas office, where I'm at right now, we have Dr. Michael Manev, Medical Director. We have Brian Williams, who's our Deputy Director of Operations. And then we have Chris Franklin, who was our Management Analyst 4. In our Carson City office, we have Harold Wickham, who's our Deputy Director of Programs, William Cuenga, Deputy Director of Prison Industries, Christina Leathers, who is our Chief of Human Resources. And by the way, she will be the one that's controlling the PowerPoint. And then we'll also have Georgia Powers. She's the Chief of our Offender Management Division. So, Chief Leathers, next slide, please. On February 27th, 2020, Dr. Michael Manev, our medical director, sent out materials to medical staff educating them on the possible signs and symptoms, risk factors, and modes of transmission of SARS-CoV-2, which we now refer to as COVID-19. Next slide. On March 16th, 2020, I issued a statement advising all staff on the progress made to address staff and inmate safety. Firewalls were set up between facilities and the community, suspending all inmate visitation, inmate access to the community, and reentry of all non-DOC service providers. In addition, legal visits were modified to video calls only. In DOC facilitated programs such as substance abuse, reentry, mental health, educational services, however, were allowed to resume as scheduled with reduced capacity to maintain compliance with current COVID protocols. Emergency Operations Centers, or EOCs as we call them, were established in all NDOC facilities to allow for efficient tracking and communication of all things related to COVID-19. Town hall meetings were also implemented in the facilities for wardens and executive staff to relay COVID-19 related updates. Town halls were also utilized to allow for staff and inmates to ask COVID-19 related questions and to seek for clarification and COVID-19 protocols. If you're not familiar with the term town halls, it's basically a meeting that consists of either a group of inmates and or employees where we not only present prepared information with the latest data available, but we also allow them to ask questions, and then we will answer those questions if we have them, or we will get back to the inmates or the staff if we had to go follow up. And we learned a lot about what was going on at each of our facilities through these town halls, and our emergency operations centers. Next slide, please. On March 18, 2020, NDOC employees were declared essential workers and were authorized to continue working through the pandemic. Dr. Michael Manev issued an order that all employees will have their temperatures taken and documented in a monitoring book prior to entrance into any NDOC facility. Protocols were also implemented regarding employees refusing temperature checks, as well as guidelines for individuals exhibiting cardinal signs and symptoms and post-exposure to infected individuals and areas with a high prevalence of COVID-19. On March 20th, 2020, inmates were provided with 2 free phone calls per week in response to the cancellation of visiting privileges. On March 26th, I issued a statement confirming that the NDOC had their first COVID-19 positive staff member at High Desert State Prison. In response, Warden Johnson of our High Desert State Prison took the following actions. The employee was instructed to self-quarantine at home, and all inmates who had had close contact were quarantined in their cells and monitored. On the state level, medical staff continued to provide health screenings prior to entrance into the facility. Surface sanitation teams continued to clean surfaces in all facilities. Next slide, please. In April of 2020, Deputy Director of Operations, Harold Wickham at the time, issued a statement advising of CDC recommendations to utilize personal protective equipment, or PPEs, as well as announcing that prison industries would begin manufacturing and distributing PPEs, such as gowns and masks, as well as hand sanitizers to supply the department during the nationwide shortage. COVID-19 protocols on screenings and guidelines for quarantine and isolation for both staff and inmates were also updated to reflect updates released by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, better known as CDC. On April 14th, I issued an update regarding the success of the EOCs and their ability to help contain the spread of COVID-19 by utilizing the following statewide protocols: medical screenings for all staff, the utilization of surface sanitation teams by thoroughly cleaning all facilities using a solution with 10% bleach concentration, and issuance of face masks and hand sanitizer to all staff. On April 27th, I issued a statement making it mandatory that NDOC employees working inside a secure facility wear a protective mask. In this statement, I also reminded all supervisors that no staff member would be allowed to return to work until cleared through Dr. Manel. Next slide, please. On May 8th, 2020, Dr. Manel issued an update to the list of symptoms, clarifying that a fever was now defined as a temperature of 100 degrees Fahrenheit or above. On May 19th, I announced the first COVID-19 positive inmate at High Desert State Prison. And on May 26th, I announced that the NDOC has confirmed 4 inmates have tested positive for COVID-19. Those positive tests have triggered the following modifications to the current protocols. All staff and inmates will be tested for COVID-19. Next slide, please. On July 31st, COVID-19 protocols were once again updated. Staff will now be tested for COVID-19 every 2 weeks beginning August 3rd, 2020. In addition, transportation and hospital custody officers will continue to be tested weekly. Next slide, please. On August 19th, 2020, NDOC employees were advised that they would be able to bring family members to get tested at NDOC facilities. Next slide, please. On November 19th, 2020, an emergency COVID-19 meeting was held between the NDOC, the Governor's Office, and the Department of Health and Human Services Department of Behavioral and Public Health. On November 19th, 2020, COVID-19 protocols were updated, mandating staff members who had had close contact with any inmates with confirmed COVID-19 infection, further defined as contact within less than 6 feet, for an cumulative time of 15 minutes or more over the course of their shift, would have to wear an N95 mask at all times. Next slide, please. On December 7th, 2020, weekly meetings with all wardens to discuss daily operations and COVID-19 updates were initiated. Also, the emergency response manual was revised with emphasis on COVID-related sections. Section 13, which falls under employee job action / work stoppage, as well as Section 14, medical emergencies, including infectious diseases. By December 9th, 2020, Binax Now rapid tests were authorized to be used in conjunction with the use of the PCR swab testing through Quest Diagnostics to clear staff to return to work. Per the Department of Health and Human Services, the Binax Now test required verification with a PCR swab testing, the gold standard until enough tests were done to confirm the accuracy. Next slide, please. On December 21st, staff from the Department of Health and Human Services conducted a visit in High Desert State Prison located in Indian Springs, Nevada. In response to rising COVID-19 cases at the Northern Nevada correctional facilities, an emergency COVID-19 meeting was held between DHHS and DBPH, the Governor's Office, and NDOC on December 24th and December 25th. Next slide, please. On January 1st, 2021, NDOC announced that NDOC staff will be offered COVID-19 vaccinations. In Southern Nevada, staff vaccination efforts began on January 6th at the Casa Grande Transitional Housing location. Beginning January 3rd, the executive team led a statewide campaign to encourage staff to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Touring all major facilities were conducted to meet with staff and discuss the importance of the vaccination. Next slide, please. On January 4th, 2021, masking protocols were updated. All NDOC staff, inmates, and visitors were required to wear an N95 mask at all times while on NDOC property or sanctioned all property movements. For example, court visits, India fire crews in and of themselves, as well as inmate quarters, etc. Then on January 5th, there were revisions made to the Facility Operations Procedure 490, which is an institutional sanitation and inspections, specifically with regards to infectious disease control. The Department of Health and Human Services conducted another NDOC site visit on January 18th, this time at the Northern Nevada Correctional Center in Carson City, Nevada. Next slide, please. COVID-19 inmate vaccinations officially begins at NDOC in March of 2021. In line with the DHHS guidance, the first group of inmates vaccinated were those 70 years old and above. Vaccinations began at the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center on March 3rd, followed by other institutions in Northern as well as Southern Nevada. Next slide, please. Also in line with DHHS guidance, COVID-19 vaccinations begins for inmates in all age groups by April of 2021. This massive undertaking to vaccine all consenting inmates began on April 5th, 2021 at the Casa Grande Transitional Housing Facility. NDOC facilities statewide followed soon after. On April 20th and 21, Lovelock Correctional Center received aid from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, better known as FEMA, to assist vaccination of inmates at their facility as well as nearby camps at Humboldt as well as Carlin. Other outside agencies, such as the local pharmacist in Ely and local health departments at Tonopah, Wells, as well as Pioche, had also provided assistance in vaccinating staff and inmates in our facilities throughout Nevada. Next slide, please. As vaccination rates gradually increased with NDOC staff and inmates, visitation resumed in NDOC facilities on March 1st, with COVID-19 mitigation protocols in place, such as inmate and visitor testing and the use of plexiglass between the visitor and the inmate. I apologize. I think I said March. I'm going to correct that. That was May 1st. Let's go ahead and go transition to the next slide, please. As of May 19th, 2021, NDOC had 4 active inmate COVID-19 cases and 12 active staff COVID-19 cases. There's also been a total of 4,565 COVID-19 cases among inmates and 1,001 COVID-19 cases among staff since the pandemic began. The COVID-19 mortality rate for offenders at NDOC stands at 1% currently, compared to 1.7 for the state of Nevada as a whole. Finally, has been a cumulative total of 48 confirmed COVID-19 related deaths among the inmates and 3 confirmed COVID-19 related deaths among staff. Dr. Murnell, were you interested in further elaborating on that, or would you like to just catch it at the end?
I can elaborate.
Perfect. Next slide, please. As of May 18th, 2021, 1,276 staff, or 50.5%, have received the COVID-19 vaccine. In addition, 5,967 inmates, or 56.3% of the total inmate population, has been vaccinated for COVID-19. Next slide, please. The Nevada Department of Corrections is tentatively scheduled to reopen core services such as the law library, religious services, and programming on June 7th, 2021. There are also plans to collaborate with the Nevada Division of Emergency Management. Lanita McGee, Operations Chief, State of Nevada Division of Emergency Management, is currently reviewing our request for assistance at other facilities. Nursing medical provider duties include weekly COVID-19 offender and staff testing, COVID-19 inmate visitation testing, daily sick call visits, triage for offenders, STD offender screening, chronic disease clinic visits for offenders, intake history, and physical medical provider for new offenders at HDESP, which is High Desert, and phlebotomy services for offenders in need of blood draws. Chief McGee's team include Kelly Barati, Deputy Operations Section Chief, also of the Warehouse Group Supervisor. We have Eric Wilson, Logistics Section Chief, Nevada Division of Emergency Management State Emergency Operations Center, and Danielle IT Allen, Training Officer 1, and then ESF 8, and L&O Nevada Department of Health and Human Services, and Rodney Wright, State Exercise Officer, Nevada Public Safety Division of Emergency Management. The NDOC continues to encourage both staff and inmates to receive COVID-19 vaccination in our ongoing fight against COVID-19. Staff continue to work tirelessly during the pandemic. Next slide. So at this particular time, before I open up to questions, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Michael Manez to see if you wanted to update any of the information or elaborate. And thank you very much, Chief Leather, for moving forward with the presentation.
Thank you, Director. This is Michael Manez, Medical Director for Nevada Department of Corrections, for the record. I just wanted to provide a little bit more information in regards to the data that was presented by Director Charles Daniels during the presentation. As of May 18, 2021, we have 50.5% of NDOC staff have received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. In addition, the 56.3% of NDOC's total inmate population has received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. The estimate at this point is that 38% of NDOC offenders are fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated status refers to an individual who has received either 2 doses of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. And that means that they've not only completed the 2 doses, but they've had a period of time of 2 weeks after the second dose, or they have received 1 dose of the Janssen vaccine, which is a single dose vaccine, and they have completed 2 weeks after the single dose of the Janssen vaccine. And that's all the information I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone may have in regards to our COVID vaccination or mitigation strategies going forward.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you, Director Daniels. This is Chair Hardesty. Couple of follow-up questions. One, what is the fully vaccinated percentage of staff as of May 18th? Do you happen to have that number?
Thank you for the question. This is Michael Minna, Medical Director. Right now, what I can say is that 50.5% of NDOC staff have received at least 1 dose of either the Janssen vaccine, Moderna, or Pfizer. Unfortunately, I'm unable to tease out the numbers of those individuals that are fully vaccinated, since a lot of the staff are going to receive vaccinations out in the community. But what I can tell you at this point is that at least 50.5% of NDOC staff have received at least 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine.
Thank you. And then the second question is, what is the NDOC mask use policy as of today, and what will it be, and will it change or is expected to change anytime in the near future?
Thank you for the question. Currently, we are sticking to the requirement to have all NDOC staff, offenders, and visitors to our facilities wear N95 masks at all times. We are currently in discussion regarding the new CDC guidance, but we have not made a determination in regards to mask requirements at this time.
This is Director Daniels. I'd like to further elaborate on this. As it relates to the visitors, all of them, if they're going to visit within the facility, they have to wear a mask, but that's not specific to an N95. And they also have to have a Binex now test before they can be permitted. Now, for the inmates that are receiving a visit, all of the inmates must wear an N95 mask. So I just wanted to elaborate on that little distinction.
And then this is a separate question, partially related to health, but partially related to the challenges that the courts are having around the state getting jury trials started again. Director, you might recall we had a conversation about access to attorneys to confer with their clients and or potential witnesses within the system. And I know you were open to allowing that access to occur. I just wondered if you could comment, has that been taking place? And what are the protocols with respect to the communications between inmates, their attorneys, and or inmates who might be witnesses so that trials can begin with respect to those cases?
If I could, this is Deputy Director Williams of Operations.
Sure.
We are allowing attorneys to come in and visit during our visitation. We've also been in contact with several judges, as we're also setting up Zoom links so that way they can participate virtually in our facilities as well. Each facility has been challenged with setting up those systems. I've also been in contact with Costa Rico, with the parole board, to try to also get those things set up and work out a schedule. That way we can accommodate all parties, whether it be the courts, parole board, or EMCs. We're good to go at each one of our facilities moving forward.
Thank you, Director Williams. Let me offer this. The Supreme Court is considering the formation of a commission to evaluate the continued use of virtual communications in certain matters. It would be very useful, I think, to the Supreme Court to hear from NDOC and get your point of view on the use of virtual communication going forward. Some things have come out of the pandemic that have been positive. And one of those things, I think, has been the use or potential continued use of virtual hearings or communications on some matters, not all, but some. And I would really appreciate your perspective on areas where you feel that works, areas you feel there are problem areas, and as well, communication to the Department of Sentencing Policy, how that may have affected your travel budgets and your transportation budgets of your inmates to various courts and other hearings around the state. I know you've been really challenged in all this process. I really appreciate your cooperation, and we'd really appreciate your perspective if you could communicate that both to the court as well as to the Department of Sentencing Policy.
Chief Justice Hardesty, this is Director Daniels for the record. We currently do authorize, especially the legal visits and so on. We don't have an issue. As with any endeavor, we're challenged with the cost of maintaining a program that requires much more bandwidth and additional video equipment. Nonetheless, I've spoken with several of the judges. They've called and we've had this conversation, and many of them actually like the fact that we can perform a lot of the duties that assist them as well with not tying up so many people and so on. So we are a proponent of more of it. We know that it works, but as with anything, we need to be upfront and share with the judges, as we've done. There's a cost to it. We've got to have staff that are there to monitor it. And we also have to have the physical equipment to facilitate it, meaning any of the court types of proceedings. And in addition to that, we're going to have the bandwidth as well as our ability to record and so on, so that it works and we can do a job that's commensurate with what the courts expect. But everyone that I've spoken with has been very positive about it. We've uncovered some things that actually work probably better than the old system. So you can rest assured we will keep our data. I am always open to a phone call from anyone. And if you provide me with specific data you want us to track, I will be more than happy to ensure you get it at the intervals that you would expect.
Thank you, Director. And mostly what I'm seeking is your input and suggestions about any challenges you face. The issue of bandwidth is a common issue throughout the state. I know the American Rescue Plan and the Treasury guidelines associated with that contemplate some use of those funds for improved bandwidth. And frankly, part of the effort of this commission that the Supreme Court is considering is to catalog some of this so that requests can be made to the legislature when they decide how to approach the allocation of the American Rescue Plan to help facilitate improved operational costs through these virtual hearings. Virtual hearings are not always the best in all cases, but certain cases, they certainly are warranted. And having your input, Director, and your team's input would be very helpful for the court's consideration.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice Hardesty. Yes, we will provide you with the information, and we look forward to working more with the courts.
I believe Ms. Wellborn has a question, and then we'll invite other commission members to ask any questions or comments. Ms. Wellborn?
Thank you, Chair Hardesty. Just two questions. The first one, some members of the public had trouble hearing the vaccination rate for incarcerated individuals. Can you just repeat that one more time on the record and, delineate who's fully vaccinated, where folks are at in the stages of the vaccination process, just one more time for clarity for the record. And then my second question is, I'm curious about what department is considering for those correctional officers who might be declining to be vaccinated and whether or not they will continuously be asked to wear a mask while on duty.
You do the first one, I'll do the second one.
This is Michael Minna, Medical Director. At this time, 38% of NDOC's offenders are fully vaccinated. That is defined as, again, for individuals that have received 2 doses of either the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine. They have completed not only the 2 doses, but the 2-week period after the second dose, or they have received 1 dose of the Janssen single-dose vaccine and have completed a 2-week period following the single dose of the Janssen vaccine. And that compares to, as of 5/19/21, the Nevada Health Response Dashboard data shows that 31.59% of the state of Nevada's population is fully vaccinated using the same definition that I repeated earlier in regards to the definition of fully vaccinated.
May I have a follow-up on that question, Justice Hardesty?
Yes, sure.
It is the rate, I mean, it's improved. It seems that it's improved since the last time a report was given publicly on this matter. And there was some discussion about a lack of willingness for some of the inmates to want a vaccine. Are you still experiencing that process? So I guess the first question is, do you have enough doses to vaccinate everyone? And 2, is there still resistance to folks? And 3, what can we do to assist in helping those people feel a level of comfort to be vaccinated?
Thank you for your question. There was periods of vaccine hesitancy, particularly in relation to the some of the side effects that were noted with the Janssen vaccine, particularly in females in relation to blood clots. So naturally, some of the female offenders at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center were wary. Obviously, we did not, we immediately took away the Janssen vaccine for in alliance with the FDA recommendations. But even despite that, we did have a sizable proportion of female offenders who did not want to get did not want to get the Moderna vaccine because of concerns that there might be associated side effects with those vaccines also. I have personally gone out with my nursing staff, my chief of nursing, Leah Flores, as well as the nursing staff, to all our southern facilities to personally vaccinate inmates. It's been a very rewarding experience. And I'm very proud of our nursing efforts to vaccinate as many offenders as we possibly can. We do have enough vaccine available through the health department, not only here locally in the south, but also in the north, to vaccinate offenders. And we've been very fortunate to, just recently, we did have a meeting through telephone with Lanita McGee, which was mentioned during the presentation, from the Department of Emergency Management, and they've been extremely generous in lending us support with vaccinators to come out and help with our vaccination efforts. We actually do have We do actually have upcoming vaccination clinics coming up here on May 24th. We have a vaccination clinic at High Desert State Prison. Again, that's going to be with assistance from Department of Emergency Management. They're going to have their vaccinating staff come out with us and our nursing staff. We also have vaccination clinics scheduled for May 25th at Warm Springs Correctional Center. Stewart Conservation Camp on May 25th. And we also have a vaccination clinic at Southern Desert Correctional Center on May 26th. And so, again, we do have enough vaccine to supply to our offenders. Sometimes it requires speaking to offenders in either groups or small individual scenarios to talk a lot of the offenders into accepting the vaccine. I know personally, I've gone out to Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center, and I've met personally with offenders, and I found that to be a better strategy in answering individual questions from offenders that might be hesitant about receiving the vaccine. And it was definitely a rewarding experience because we were able to talk a lot of offenders that were hesitant about the vaccine into accepting the vaccine.
Right. I believe there was a second component, Ms. Wellborn, but to be honest with you, I forgot your first question. Could you repeat it, please?
Oh, yeah. The second question was whether or not the department intends to mandate that any corrections staff who are declining to be vaccinated, that they wear a mask.
Hi, this is Director Daniels. I will take that question. The answer right now is no. There is no requirement, nor are we visiting that requirement for all staff to have mandatory vaccinations to be able to work. What we noticed is that over the time since we began dealing with this issue, we've noticed that whatever we provide or direction we give, we understand it's really more of a continuum depending on where we're at, the rates that we're having. Are we getting a lot more infections, more virus spread? Are we having outbreaks or not? And that guidance is in many respects driven by the Centers for Disease Control, as well as our state Health and Human Services Department. So there's a lot of collaboration going on. And we also have to take into consideration, though, that our employees are state employees as well. And although we're in a specialized environment, they still have the rights afforded to them that all state employees have. We try to encourage and influence, but right now we're just trying to work through what we're dealing with. And so I can tell you right now, as of today, although we've had those conversations regarding the mandatory wearing the mandatory vaccination process, we currently are not mandating. And so that's where we are as it relates to the vaccination process. Would you like me to elaborate or follow up further, or was that okay?
I mean, I don't think my question was so much about mandatory vaccination. So there's lots of issues there from a medical, a civil rights standpoint. So I'm understand that there, but as to for those who are declining, are they, my understanding was that you had a mask mandate within the department for all correctional employees. So if folks are declining to be vaccinated, are they then still required, or if folks are not vaccinated, are they still required to wear a mask?
If you are, this is Director Daniels for the record, if you are assigned within a secure facility, all 100% of my staff must wear an N95 mask.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from commission members for the director? Yes, Mr. Arascata.
Yes, I have a question, and I guess it goes more towards bandwidth, and we were talking about efficiencies. During the course of the pandemic, and then we received notice in April regarding parole hearings, our office worked with the Department of Prisons to schedule phone call appointments with clients that are coming forth for parole hearings. We've been told that, sent in an email on April 30th, that because visiting is beginning again, that no longer is in effect. So we've provided all of our office phone numbers to the department so they can make attorney-client calls. The problem is if the client calls the attorney and the attorney is not able to receive the call or is busy or in court, we can't call them back. So we get stuck in a lot of hit and miss with talking to clients that are to be appearing in front of the parole board. Having the schedule makes it work much better from an efficiency standpoint. And also, I believe Chairman DeRico would agree, speeds up the parole hearing process, that we're not having to ask to recess or to delay the start of hearings to talk to clients that we've been unable to speak to because we can't call them back when they called us. So I guess my question is would the Department of Corrections consider, for the purpose of parole hearings, continuing to work with our office and I would assume Clark County in scheduling the inmate calls so that we know that they're set in stone, as opposed to this hit and miss without being able to return the call?
Deputy Director Williams, for the record, we can definitely work with you as far as scheduling calls. We're open to anything to try to make this transition as smooth as possible as we begin the reopening. So if there's someone in your office that can just reach out to me, Deputy Director Williams of Operations, and I will work with them and we will get that worked out to where this transition is smooth.
Okay, and I'm sorry, it's Director Williams?
Yes, Deputy Director of Operations, Brian Williams.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks for entertaining a very long-winded question to what came as a short answer. I appreciate it.
No worries.
Any other questions for the director or his staff? All right, seeing none, let's move on to agenda item number 6. Thank you, Director. Appreciate your work and your staff and your presentation today. Agenda item 6 concerns a supplement to the AB 236 report.
Chief Justice Hardesty, this is Director Daniels. I do apologize for cutting into where you were going. I do have something else for the record, if you don't mind.
Sure, no problem. Go right ahead.
Absolutely. In closing, I want the Sentencing Commission to know the 2,600 professional men and women of the Nevada Department of Corrections were designated as essential from day one and were not afforded the opportunity to telework. All uniformed and non-uniformed employees were required to report to duty in spite of having to deal with the issues impacting the rest of us in the community, to include childcare issues, instability, loss of employment, income based on whatever was going on with their family. And also they had family members as well as themselves contracting COVID-19. And in some cases that led to death, to include members of my own family. So having said that, I am proud of their dedication, commitment, acceptance of responsibility, and willingness to, quote, man the line, unquote, in our prisons, conservation camps, and transitional housing. I salute each and every employee for their sacrifice while keeping our society safe. Sir, with that ends my presentation. Chief Justice Hardesty, I yield back to you, sir.
Thank you, Director. I appreciate that remark and that observation. And I am confident that all of the commission members share your thanks and appreciation to your staff for conducting their duties appropriately and with dignity during a challenging period of time. We share in your comments and appreciate their service. Thank you, sir. Let's move on to agenda item number 6, AB 236. As I mentioned, we had a report at our last meeting. There was quite a discussion about that and questions asked, and staff has worked to provide a supplement answering some questions. And so, Victoria, if you would, please walk us through the supplement that's attached.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Victoria Gonzalez. Yes, as the Chair mentioned, we took the opportunity based on the question discussions from the previous meeting regarding that first AB 236 report to put together answers to those questions and then some visualizations that I thought would not only help answer some of the questions and address some of the discussion that came up, but help set the tone for what we hope to do in the future as we continue to experiment with how we could organize this information in the way that makes it the most meaningful to the commission and to the public when it comes to evaluating this information. So as the chair said, I will walk through the report. I will put it up on the screen as well. And I apologize. We had hoped to get this to the commission well in advance of the meeting. And I know that I believe we got it to you maybe on Tuesday or Wednesday. So I hope you've had enough time to take a look at it. And again, we're looking forward to any input and feedback you have as we continue to evolve in how we'd like to put together publications for the commission that come to help the commission, but then come out of the department. And I want to thank all the individuals that we met with in order to continue to learn more about data and how to present it. I want to thank the staff for everything we've put in. You can see there's a huge, I would say a couple evolutions that we've realized based on our previous publications, and I'm really excited to share this with you as we continue to learn and figure out what again is most meaningful. And I want to thank our friends at NDOC who we continue to work with and learn from. I am prepared to answer questions when I'm done at the end of the report, but I do have them here with us. And so whether they would like to help with and answering those questions, or I may use them as a phone a friend, depending on the questions that come up. So table of contents. Introduction, a couple of things I want to highlight is the purpose of this report and what the source of the data that we used. So the data came from several places. It came from data that was reported back in February in the AB 236 report. It was data that we collected in response to the meeting back in February. We went back and looked at data that was used to develop AB 236 so that we could look at some of those comparisons and some of those key metrics that were used when we first got here in the first place. And then just other data that we continue to collect as we either had discussions with stakeholders or DOC or any other questions that came up that we thought might be helpful. And we've sourced those appropriately throughout the document. The other thing I want to know, as you can see with the other notes we have here, is this has not been adopted by the commission, and so that's why we've made it clear that it's from the department. And so wanted to make it clear that while AB 236 and the AB 236 report included recommendations from the as approved and adopted by the commission, this supplement does not include such recommendations. One of the questions that came up back in February and was absolutely necessary for the purpose of the report was getting proper definitions. So we know what these terms mean and how we are going to use them. And so we worked with DOC and we have come up with these definitions and terms that we'll continue to use when we refer to data metrics and other pieces of the report. First, the report is organized just as analysis of the population in general, the prison population. One of the things that we went back and reflected about AB 236 was the projections that were identified when those policies were developed. The projections that were identified back were from 2018, and the recommendations for AB 236 were to help alleviate some of that growth, slow the growth, and see changes in the prison population. As we know, because of 2020, COVID has also affected this, but I think these comparisons continue to provide meaning as far as where were we back in 2018? What did those projections say? How have the projections continued to change over time? And what does the actual population look like right now? In the lower right-hand side, this is an example of what I was talking about, where we are working with DOC on getting regular information about additional metrics that will be important to keep track of. So this is the admissions and release rate that we are information that we'll continue to track. This will be important, of course, in trying to determine what's happening as we're coming out of the pandemic and how that's affecting the prison population. And so we'll be able to keep an eye on that on a regular basis, and at any time be able to maybe see what trends do we see happening and keep an eye on those over time. Another question that came up was the idea of taking some of those, the drug offense groups and looking at the top 10 offenses in each of those groups. We started with drug and property. At the commission meeting, we were asked to look at the top 10 in all the offense groups that were reported in the AB 236 report. However, we started with drug and property to see what this would look like, see what meaning it provides, and see if this is the kind of information that would be helpful for the commission. We can continue to get these, work with DOC to get this information. I will note that these numbers do not line up to the data that was presented in the report because these conviction counts are based on individual sentences rather than being aggregated by offender, which is how the data was presented in the AB 236 report. Next, after an analysis of the population, we move on to an analysis of admissions. One of the discussions that came up was trying to understand more about what the data tells us about those violators that are coming back from supervision. So when the report was presented back in February, we divided the data up by parole violator with a new conviction, parole violator without a new conviction, and same thing similarly for a probation violator. Here we've combined them just to show an overall comparison of who's coming back from supervision, which is similar to how the data was presented back in the recommendations for AB 236. That AB 236 data that was presented to develop AB 236 did break it down by those without a conviction and with a new conviction. But I believe that this data is aggregating the data this way is also meaningful. One of the things that we're learning, as I mentioned, is an ongoing project we're going to work on with agencies and stakeholders is understanding what it means to be either a parole violator or a probation violator as AB 236 enacted those technical violations. One of the things that we added here was clarifying what violation could be a result of. It could be a result of absconding. While it could be a result of a technical violation, it's important to note that a technical violation also includes the commission of certain crimes. But there are crimes that are exempted from that. And so we want to make clear that a violation could be a commission of certain crimes that's not a technical violation. It could be a technical violation, which also could include a commission of certain crimes or conditions of supervision. Additionally, some of these could be also parolees who are waiting for the outcome of a hearing that will determine whether or not they've been revoked. So we are being more aware of what this data could include or represent. We are going to keep these in mind as we're collecting data metrics and see what we can gather and present to the commission to make, again, this data more meaningful so that we can assess what's happening and what recommendations could be made. This was mirrored off of some of the data that was presented in the development of AB 236, and so thought we could do a similar comparison here by grouping the offense groups by violent and non-violent to see some trends. As we know, in the background of all of this data analysis is AB 236 did not go into effect until July 1. Additionally, we have the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, and so in the future, any data that we present from 2020 will have the caveat that the data could be a little confusing, but at least it provides some information and comparisons that we, again, even just looking at this, we can try and determine what trends we see. Again, this was modeled off of a comparison that we saw back when the recommendations were developed by grouping those, what the criminal history looks like for those with prior offenses. When we presented the data in in February, we provided the specific numbers of those who had 0 prior felony convictions, 1 prior felony convictions, and so on. So here we group them just so we could see maybe the data and how it could be analyzed and looked at a little differently. In response to a question that came up and discussion that came from the February meeting and in response to the report was wanting to understand more about those admissions with 0 prior felony convictions. So we worked with DOC to start experimenting with what kinds of data we could collect. This is an example of the data we could collect about those admissions who had 0 prior felony convictions. As was discussed, there's I think the assumption or the possible conclusion could be made that just because someone's admitted with 0 prior felony doesn't mean they don't have a criminal history. And so while this data, we did not aggregate it because it's not offender based, we can't track it through. By looking at each of these, it can give you an idea of what that part of the population, those part of the admissions look like that have never, or according to their admission, they have not have a prior felony conviction, but they clearly, some of them do have other interactions with the criminal justice system. Again, just another comparison of the data that we saw, grouping those who are returning from supervision generally. AB 236 has many policies directed at trying to make, obviously, sweeping changes to everything throughout the criminal justice system, including those with how individuals are being supervised, those temporary violations, the graduated sanctions. And so as we gather more information about this, this might be another comparison that, again, provides meaning as far as just assessing who's a new commitment versus who's coming back from supervision. On page 12 is an analysis of information that's related to the mental health or substance use that's indicated at intake. One thing we did not clarify in the February report was where this data came from. And so just to clarify here, which we've added in this report, is that this data comes from the Nevada Risk Assessment System prison intake tool. And what this is not the assessment of a mental health professional, but just based on the answers that they get while they're collecting information for the intake, do they see an indication of mental health? Do they see an indicator of substance use or a combination of the two? So we've just clarified the verbiage here and where the source of this information so that we can properly understand what we're measuring when at admission. Here's a visualization of the data that we had collected for the releases. This was just comes right from what we had put together in the report. But again, in our attempt to make things more meaningful, thought it might be helpful to have visuals to see where we see trends. Again, AB 236, by changing certain the penalties for certain offenses and changing details about requirements or the thresholds for those offenses, we are looking at certain, we wanted to see, over time, we're going to want to see what trends we see in admissions and releases in those category B and category Cs, as that's one of the things that AB 236 was looking to possibly have an impact on. So again, we thought this visualization might provide some meaning when it comes to evaluating those information, whether we're talking about when the offenders are released or when they are admitted. Just a little more information about releases. And here we have a mental health status that is different than the mental health and substance use indicators that we presented in regards to admissions. As you can see here, this mental health status is the result of an assessment that is conducted by a mental health professional and has a different measurement of what the indicators are or what the impairments are that are measured from that assessment. And then similar to what we had done with admissions, or we had compared, if we want to see who is coming back from supervision, and looking again those supervision policies and the changes to that and what impacts we see, wanted to group the data here to show that that comparison. And then finally on page 15, to wrap up the admissions and releases components of the report, again, to figure out who's coming in, who's going out, what does it look like, and what do those numbers look like. Overall, we will do more detailed comparisons of this, but this overall trend, we can see how many are admitted and how many are released. Again, the caveat here is going to be COVID, probably. And so, but over time, we'll continue to be able to measure these trends, what we see of the number of those being admitted, what type of felony category we see, and then when they're released, who do we see being released compared to who was admitted. Our report also included information about recidivism. Something we did not clarify in our report was what the definition of recidivism is for the purpose of this data. So we've provided that here. And it is calculated based on the year of release and a return within 36 months of that release. And here that cohort is labeled as the 2016 cohort. On the lower right-hand side, I included the rate, the overall recidivism rate, not in the visual, but in the text. So I just clarified that those numbers there are not represented in a visual when you're assessing and reviewing the data that we have analyzed here as far as who, what it's looking like for recidivists. And page 17, similar, we took some of the data that we reported and continue to try and experiment with putting together some visualizations so we can get a grasp of who's coming back when it comes to this type of information. As was previously discussed, we continue to look for other types of key metrics that we can use to measure recidivism. And I think when it comes to trying to determine what the drivers are, what trends we see, it's going to require taking different sources of data, but this will be one area where you continue to evaluate what's happening. And as we had talked about, as we collect data over time, these visualizations will look different as we're comparing what happened in 2020 versus what happened, or sorry, with the 2016 cohort versus the 2017 cohort and such. Something upon review of the recommendations that led to the enactment of AB 236 was the analysis of what was happening with female admissions and releases. So upon that review, we took that model and put together some information here that would be a comparison of what was presented to lead to the enactment of AB 236. And then what we have now in terms of that data. And so just to be clear, that was the rationale for putting together this type of comparison and analysis, was just to tie it back to what led to AB 236 and looking at some of those metrics to go back and compare and just evaluate where are we. And as we know, as the Division of Parole and Probation is moving over to their new offender tracking system, the data we have is limited, but thought it was still worth taking what we did have. And just so there can be a visualization of what we see of those being supervised, whether they're on probation or parole. And we have that visualization here. As I mentioned, and to conclude the reports to conclude this supplement, we have future reports that we anticipate putting together. This report is an example of what we hope to do for our data digests, where we look for key metrics. We can provide visualizations and analysis of what data we see. And as I mentioned, when we're looking into investigating and researching more about technical violations, graduated sanctions, and temporary vacations, that was what we're looking for in future reports as well. Not only the data related to that, but the cost that's associated with that and any impacts that are, whether it's fiscal or practical to the agencies as they relate to those. And as I put here in conclusion, this is an example of us looking at the data, trying to identify key metrics that might be valuable for the commission to continue to track over time to make recommendations, whether they relate to AB 236, sentencing, or the criminal justice system in general. We will continue to take recommendations from the commission on what you see as important key metrics that we evaluate and keep track of, and we can, I guess, experiment with those in our publication of them and our visualizations. Again, I wanted to thank staff for all the work we put into developing this. Again, I'm very proud of this as far as like a huge evolution from where we've started. And it is a great indicator of where we're going. And I think this is an example when I mentioned what we're hoping for data projects. Someday, you know, if we can build a data dashboard, it would be something like this where someone can go in and look at these metrics and make your selection and see what we have. But this is, I think, a great place to start. But I have to say, part of this comes from the inviting feedback, criticism, and any recommendations from stakeholders, agencies, and of course, this commission. And so we definitely invite that, even if it's not today in this meeting, please send us messages, or if you would like to set up a meeting to discuss more of what we did here, as we want to evolve and we want to improve. And we see that we can only do that if we take that feedback and work with those who are in the system and can give us the important feedback that's relevant. So again, I want to thank staff, and again, thank DOC and the other stakeholders who we met with in contributing to this. It's a great example of, I think, what I think the state is capable of when it comes to data and analysis. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions and turn it back to the chair.
There's a lot of information that has come at you. And I think one point I would reiterate that the executive director made, and that is as you spend time looking at the data that she has provided in the supplement, you will likely have other questions or questions. And I urge you to communicate directly with the executive director for that information. I'm going to ask her to collect those questions and so that other commission members are aware of those inquiries and what the responses have been. That summary, if we could, Director Gonzalez, could be provided at the September meeting. This is an evolving process. It's certainly been a challenge for the staff, and I applaud their efforts to try to reform and expand based on the input to date. And it's an ongoing conversation that the commission would be engaged in with staff as we expand and develop this data. And conclusions from the data, I think, will be a next step. But I don't think we're there yet. I think we have a ways to go, but we're getting a lot closer than we have been. And I have to say, some of this data is stuff, Chuck, that we probably would have liked to have seen more than a decade ago.
Yeah.
So let me invite any questions or comments from commission members at this point, but certainly you are encouraged and welcome to add questions to the director directly, and then she'll offer comments or responses and then collect those and include that in a report to the entire commission in September. Mr. Hicks, did you want to begin?
Thank you. First off, I was at the last meeting, the thorn in the director's side that prompted a lot of this additional work. And I just want to commend her and the Department of Corrections for really working to get some of those answers out in a supplemental report. And so thank you. This is really helpful. I totally agree that this is a great start to some of that drill down data that we've all kind of craved for all these years. The one question I had, Victoria, I don't know if you can answer it, but maybe somebody from the Department of Corrections can. On the page 5, you give the prison population actual as of December 2020, and it was 11,423. I'm curious, does anybody know what it is today, 5 months, 6 months later from that December date?
Director, do you or your staff have that number?
Justice Hart, this is Deputy Director Williams for the record. The director stepped out real quick, but I will grab that number for you right now.
We have it coming right now.
Thank you.
This is Jenna Bonacorsi for the record from the Department of Corrections. As of 5/21, our total population count was 11,050 offenders. However, please note that number includes our safekeeper population, whereas AB 236 data does not include safekeepers as they are not under Nevada jurisdiction.
Can you explain what safekeeper is, please?
Sure. A safekeeper is an inmate that we hold on the behalf of another state or a court or a boot camper. And the safekeeper population that would be included in our total population we include because they are taking up a bed space in a NDOC facility. But in terms of AB 236, since it's normally an agreement between a state that will hold an offender for them or vice versa. If you look actually on page 4 in our definitions for an interstate compact, a safekeeper is essentially the opposite of that. So an interstate compact is our offender who we send in an agreement with another state. And so it's the vice versa. It's the offender we're holding for the other state.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other question, Mr. Hicks, at this time?
No, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions from commission members concerning the supplement? Yes, question. Mr. Callaway.
Thank you, Justice Hardy. Steve Chuck Callaway for the record. First, a comment, and I echo the comments made by Mr. Hicks. I want to thank Victoria for really taking this a step further. And as you said, Justice Hardesty, providing us with more in-depth look at some of these questions that have been raised for over a decade for me, that I've been raising as a member of this body and as a member of the Advisory Commission. And I really like slide 10, which I believe shows, although it's still, it's in the weeds, but it's still not deep in the weeds, but it does give us a clearer look at the background of some of these folks. And along that same line, I guess just a thought that has popped in my head, another thing that I've been preaching since day one. And when you look at the slide 6, for example, it shows under the influence of controlled substance, a number of 31 convictions in the population for under the influence of a controlled substance. And, you know, having done police work for years and years, I know that getting a conviction on a charge like that is difficult. You know, there's blood draws involved. It's not something that typically someone who's under the influence of a controlled substance and that's all they've done is convicted and goes to prison, in my experience, at any rate. And I would like to see those 31. 31's not a large number, and I know it takes resources and time, but I think it would be interesting to look at those 31 and to go back to comments that were made by the doctor earlier. Were those folks originally charged with some other crime and it was plea bargained down to under the influence of a controlled substance? What does their previous criminal history look like? What programs did they either A, participate in, and the program did not provide them avenues to get off of substance abuse, or B, programs that were offered to them that they refused to participate in, to get a totality of the circumstances? Because on the surface, I look at that number and I say, you know, that how in the world can we put 31 people in our prison system because they have a substance abuse problem and they're under the influence of narcotics? It seems on the surface to be a travesty of justice, I guess. But when I think that when we look beyond the surface and we look at the further details, we get a bigger picture of what might be occurring, and our programs being successful, because if all 31 of these folks participated in a substance abuse program and they still wound up in prison, maybe we need to reevaluate the programs they're participating in. Or maybe we see a trend where these folks refused to participate, or they flunked out or failed out of programs. And I think that because that's a small number, it's only 31, it would give us that ability to go under the microscope with those folks and maybe get a deeper dig into what's really going on with them. And just an observation on my part. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Any other questions or comments from commission members at this time? All right, seeing none, let me turn to agenda item number 7. This is an update on the status of the subawards that were made by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, as well as and the commission's then authorization for the expenditure of those funds. The total subawards, which were provided with the help and assistance of the Crime and Justice Institute, was $427,180.88. The requests were all approved by this commission, and the subawards must be spent by September 2021. So, Ms. Gonzalez, if you'd begin with that update, and we'll get into specific presentations by those who received those awards.
Thank you. So again, for the record, Victoria Gonzalez. For our department, we requested a subaward in order to fund one of our employees that we were already appropriated for, which was Laura Arnold's position. So in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we were required to make certain reductions to our budget, as all agencies were. And that resulted in keeping her position vacant until March. Because of the subaward, we were able to then hire her sooner, a couple months sooner. We hired her back in November rather than having to wait until March. And I will say that actually when we were interviewing, we let the candidates know that it's possible. We weren't quite sure about if we were going to get the grant at that time. Or the timing of, we knew we were going to get, weren't quite sure when we could get it funded. And so we told her, well, just in case we don't get the funding, or, we might be still looking at a March date. And she was very excited to join our team that she was willing to wait until March. And so luckily she didn't have to wait. And so she's been able to work with us. So we got the full funding for that. She started with us in November. We immediately worked on our invoices to CJI. And as of today, we have exhausted the funds that were granted to our department. We have invoiced for all of our funds, and we received all of our checks. So, and you can see the work that we've been able to accomplish because we had more staff and we're able to continue to advance and support the implementation of AB 236.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. Director Sherlock from Post, are you on the Zoom, and could you provide an update?
I am, Mr. Chairman. How are you this morning, I guess?
Good, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
So Mike Sherlock, for the record, I am the Executive Director of the Commission on the Peace Officer Standards and Training. As I'm sure your commission recalls, under AB 236, Post was tasked with developing and administering a behavioral health response team grant program. And along those lines, we received a subaward to sort of develop the infrastructure for that grant program. We received that subaward for about $29,000. With that award, we have contracted with a consultant. He has met with numerous law enforcement agencies and behavioral health professionals throughout our state, but also in Southern California to gain their insight in the development of this program. The consultants has had several meetings with LA County Sheriff's Mental Evaluation Team for best practices. They're pretty much touted as one of the top behavioral health response teams in the country. We have developed a model policy and procedure for calls for service involving behavioral health field response teams. We've consulted with HHS for requirements for behavioral health specialists to join these teams. We now have a standardized curriculum for crisis intervention training. This was originally developed by the Memphis Police Department, using their model, and our training is about 40 hours in length. The curriculum will be available both on our website and also in person. And any officers that take that, or any people that take that particular course, will of course get a certificate of completion. We have developed a telephone and dispatcher curriculum for crisis intervention training. Peer review panel, which is part of AB 236 grant program, has been identified and is now in place. The selection was based on their expertise and passion really for crisis intervention. One is from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. The second is from the University of Nevada Police Department. And the third is from the Reno Police Department, who is their embedded community resource officer. Our consultant has met with numerous grant writing experts, that sort of thing. And we're looking to put out just a quality product in terms of that grant application process. As of last week, we had about 474 hours into the project. We budgeted for 1,040. So we're on track to complete the project and have the entire infrastructure in place by the end of September, and we'll easily exhaust that subaward. And I can take any questions that the commission may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sherlock. Are there any questions for Mr. Sherlock? Or I'll even add Ms. Gonzalez if there are any questions of her regarding the use of the subaward by the department. All right, Mr. Sherlock, thank you. And Victoria, for your presentations. I don't see any questions. So let's invite NDOC to provide an update on their use of their subaward resources.
For the record, Chris Franklin, Management Analyst 4 for the Nevada Department of Corrections. Good morning, Chair Hardesty and honored members of the commission. Not that anybody's counting, with only 11 days left in this 81st session, I will provide you with a brief update on our grant proposals, since I know everybody's fairly busy. As you are aware, the NDOC encountered several delays while processing work programs to approve our grant spending authority through the approval process of the state of Nevada, which have all been previously discussed during Sentencing Commission meetings. As a result, these unavoidable circumstances delayed our initial implementation of our proposed plan and created a situation where a sub-grant rewrite and budget amendment were necessary in order to meet NDOC deliverables and funding expenditure timeframes. These changes also required us to again go before the commission and request approval to submit these budget updates and changes through the awardee and ultimately to the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which happened in February. This change included the addition of an administrative assistant position to support the quality assurance specialist and program officer positions, thereby allowing them to focus primarily on their quality assurance and fidelity duties and deliverables, and less on the clerical data and reporting requirements. The NDOC has continued to work with our technical advisors at CRJ and CJI since this past Sentencing Commission meeting, and have already submitted our change request in order to meet our goals and deliverables. Currently, we are awaiting final approval of this plan. Once approved, the NDOC is prepared to implement the hiring process and begin working on the deliverables. The NDOC has already provided the infrastructure for these positions by locating increased office space. Staff furniture has been moved into those offices and put in place, and some preliminary interviews for potential contracted candidates have already been completed. I thank you for your time, and I stand by for any questions by the chair or the commissioners.
Are you able to estimate, thank you for the report. I appreciate the update and it's good to see you. Thanks for your comments today. Are you able to estimate the percentage usage of the subaward thus far? And do you anticipate expending it by September? Or do we need to consider or look at extensions if possible?
That is a great question, Chair. With our updated budget, we're on track to expend the entire amount of the grant award. The first part of the grant award is, as the commissioners remember, is pretty finite. It ends in September. Then we have a secondary part of the grant awards, which can hopefully be extended through an extension request through BJA. Through CJI, they've reviewed it. They've accepted the plan. And as long as it gets approved fairly soon, we'll still meet our timeline for expending the entire amount and meeting all deliverables.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions from commission members on this part of the presentation? All right, seeing none, let's then turn to Sergeant Rosales from the Division of Parole and Probation. Sergeant?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, and thank you for joining us.
I think this is the first time I've joined a meeting and everyone can hear me at first shot. I'm getting really excited about that. Good morning, I'm Sergeant Rosales with Parole and Probation. So we are scheduled to complete our NRAS Master Training class, both in Las Vegas and up in Reno. The class will begin at the end of June and will take place pretty much throughout the month of August. So in contact with our fiscal team, we will be invoicing and paying and basically expending the $36,000 from our subaward for the Master Trainer program by the end of August. The last little bit, which was $730, was for our analyst to work on a new like kind of tracking for our current NRAS assessments, and he can complete that kind of at any time when he has a time available. So we'll try to get that also completed before the end of August. And then that'll wrap up all of the subaward.
Thank you, Sergeant. Appreciate it. I assume this has been helpful and productive to the department.
It will be vital to the department so that we can continue training all of our staff in the NRAS tool, as well as some NDOC staff, I believe, are going to come into our training and become trainers as well.
Great. Thank you. So then, are there any questions for the sergeant on her report? All right, seeing none, let's turn next to Captain Carrero from the Division of Parole and Probation. Did you want to add anything, Captain?
No. Is everybody able to hear me okay too?
Yes.
Okay, Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for your time this morning. Sergeant Rosales, thank you. She is instrumental to the sub-award regarding our NRAS and EPICS. So we appreciate all the work that she's done on that end. I'm here today to give you an update regarding the car chargers. We received $18,600 for car chargers for our officers to be able to be mobile in the field. We did receive those car chargers statewide back in March. And since we've received them, it has greatly allowed our officers to maintain in the field longer, conducting more public safety work, not only checking on our offenders to make sure that they're in compliance, but their overall health and wellness during the COVID height of the pandemic. So it's been very beneficial for us to have them be able to be more in the field and less in the office having to recharge their laptops.
Thank you, Captain. Did that expend the full amount of that sub-award then?
Yes, it did.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Captain Carrero? Okay, let's move on then to Ms. Noble and Ms. Freilich from Washoe County DA's office. Ladies, if you wouldn't mind giving us an update on your sub-award and the progress of your work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Hardesty. And I want to mention at the outset here that unfortunately Ms. Freilich is not available today. She's traveling. So she would certainly like to be with the commission. I'm going to try to cover what she would cover as best as I can. Thanks to the sub-award, which we received in the latter half of December, we hired Hunter Lenz, who started February 1st. She came to us from Ohio. She had recently moved to the area, and she worked for the court system and was actually a jury commissioner for some time. Since her February start date, Ms. Lenz has been working on our sub-award objectives part-time while also completing her coursework for her master's degree in criminal justice and homeland security. But on May 1st, she graduated, so we will have increased time to devote to the grant position from now until September. As of May 9th, we have spent just under $19,000, and we have approximately $28,700 remaining. Because Ms. Lenz is now graduated and I, as her supervisor, will be returning from the legislature 10, 12 days, I'm not sure anymore, we will have more time to devote to this important work, and we do anticipate taking advantage of the full sub-award between now and its September expiration. The commission may recall that our sub-award request had three components. The first was training for AB 236 on AB 236 changes for attorneys and staff. The second was identifying needed changes to our case management system, including auto-generated documents related to AB 236. And the third was data tracking and analysis. With regard to the first component, which was the training, we ultimately ended up needing to create a training for our DAs prior to Ms. Lenz coming on board because of the July 1st effective date. So with some substantial assistance from senior attorneys in our office, we were able to create a substantive training on AB 236 and make it remotely available to our attorneys via the Bridge program that Washoe County has. That's also been made available to law enforcement agencies and district attorneys' offices throughout the state. We broke it up into 4 different modules organized by area of law, and I think it was quite useful to folks and other agencies in terms of wrapping their arms around the changes to the law. In terms of Ms. Lenz's work so far, she spent some significant time, predictably, familiarizing herself with Nevada's criminal statutes pre-236, as well as the bill's legislative history and its significant changes to our criminal justice system. Understanding that information is, of course, critical to developing areas of inquiry and data points we want to capture. Additionally, she had to become familiar with our current criminal justice software, JustWare, which will be integral into gathering data for analysis. Some of the work that she has been engaging is development of materials to assist our deputies and staff with changes, cheat sheets, et cetera, on category B felonies and how those have changed, that type of stuff. With regard to our specialty courts, that's taken up a lot of her time. As the commission is aware, AB 236 makes diversion an option for a wider range of offenders, and our office has previously been tracking specialty court information and outcomes. But Hunter discovered that that information was not only tracked outside our criminal justice software, but we had multiple team members entering offenses and data. She identified that the information we were compiling with had a lot of inconsistencies in terms of how we identified certain crimes or charges. For example, attempted burglary might be entered as burglary, attempted, or burglary, attempted. Possession could be attempted possession, PCS, attempted, or just PCS attempted. And of course, are now broken down into subcategories with varying sentence ranges, and we were not yet consistent in terms of how we were specifying those subcategories when we were talking about specialty court outcomes and trying identified some data points that might provide useful in the future and worked with our IT department to add those categories to our criminal justice software. For example, numbers and types of technical violations, revocations, discharge to outcomes, etc. It was also important that our secretarial staff understood the basics of these changes so that they were not looking for or recording information in a vacuum. So she met with our legal secretary supervisor and helped her develop training materials for our administrative staff related to that. We've also been working on data challenges resulting from law enforcement agency changes from the Uniform Crime Reporting System to the National Incidence-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS. At the last commission meeting, I think Lieutenant Solferino informed you all that that there's a period of transition, and UCR was limited in its ability to give an accurate picture of what was going on in terms of crime rates. And that was a system in use prior to August of 2019. For example, it had under 30 offense categories, and it only kept track of the most serious charge related to a call or event. NIBRS has about 70 categories and allows much more extensive tracking. To help us understand how AB 236 is affecting crime in our communities, whether it's improving outcomes or crime rates, etc. She's working on alternative means of gathering accurate pre-2019 data by reaching out to individual law enforcement agencies, because that's going to be helpful in identifying trends over time. Now, Justice Hardesty, my understanding from the earlier discussion is that the commission is interested in, one, recidivism rates of inmates released during the pandemic, and two, identifying individuals who are arrested for violent crimes and reoffend as soon after release on OR or release on bail. So sort of two inquiries. That certainly we can work on with regard to the second area of inquiry. The first area of inquiry related to folks who are offending or not reoffending soon after their release. As to the second part, we've identified some related metrics to track, such as conditions of pretrial release and any violations. We could try to expand that data to get more specific, or we could try to get more specific to the COVID time period. But the first part of that inquiry about inmate release, I'm not sure how we could go about identifying those offenders that are prosecuted by our offices, but we can certainly look into that. It's become apparent over the past few months that so much of what we need to be doing is to set ourselves up to collect accurate data that's going to lend itself to inquiries we might be thinking of right now, as well as inquiries that are going to surface in the future. So we're still in the stage of working on our internal nuts and bolts so that we can set our agency up for success in that regard. After we determine all the changes to our data collection and processes, we're hopeful we can share that with DAs throughout the state to give them a roadmap to improve their data collection as well. So that concludes the remarks I have right now, and I'm happy, of course, to answer any questions the commission might have.
Thank you, Ms. Noble, for the thorough review. First, let me extend my congratulations to Ms. Lenz for achieving her master's. That's no small undertaking. We congratulate her on that achievement. And I appreciate your willingness to examine those other two data metrics one of the takeaways I got from your presentation and your thorough description of the evaluation of data is exactly what the sentencing department's been putting up with for several months. And so I think you were replicating what their experiences are as well. Not only challenges associated with inputting data and inconsistencies, and I'm sure that has driven everybody crazy, but at the same time, making some uniform assessments based upon on those changes. I was interested in knowing whether or not you thought, or what the DA's office was going to be able to do in retaining Ms. Lynn's services beyond September. Does the loss of the subaward cause the loss of her services and the work that your office is trying to accomplish here?
Thank you for the question, Chair Hardesty. I right now don't know the answer to that question. I'm not aware of a funding source that would be able to continue to fund Ms. Lenz's work past September, but it's definitely something that would be valuable, I think, to our office. So I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that or not.
But certainly something we ought to put on our radar screen and see if we can evaluate that and see if there are some opportunities to maintain the momentum that you all have begun. Are there any questions from commission members for Ms. Noble? All right, thank you very much for that update. And if we could then turn to Dr. Neighbors and ask her if she could provide us with an update on the subaward that was provided there.
Yes, sure. And we are up and running, which I'm excited to say. So just to kind of review, our subaward was granted to us. It was about $17,500, I believe, to implement a pilot program, which is the Start Now program. It is a nationally researched intervention manualized program that is used to address some of those criminogenic needs and thinking processes that were mentioned earlier in the meeting today. So I'm pleased to say that we are focused on and aware of those concerns, and hoping that we can present this pilot program that will show the same kind of results that have been achieved nationally, which is about a 30% reduction in recidivism with our clients in the Division of Public and Behavioral Health. This program is housed at Lakes Crossing Center, and the idea is that this process will intervene with recidivism and is necessary to implement in addition to psychiatric treatment that we provide, that you don't achieve that goal without the additional address of these concerns. So we have implemented that, and we have hired to coordinate and run that program Tom Durrani, who is a very experienced LCSW, who actually was a former agency director at Lakes Crossing, and he has begun training. The agency is providing some additional staff to work with this program. So there will be 2 additional social workers to work with the clients. The plan is that there will be 3 cohorts of about 32 clients. That would be 4 groups of 8 clients that receive the intervention. So we'll have, it's not huge numbers, but we'll have about 100 subjects by the end of the time that we complete this project, and also have trained staff to continue it beyond the grant, hopefully. We have purchased the equipment that we felt, that we had identified as necessary to do this program in an efficient way, a computer and tablets for the clients, as well as the manualized materials that will be utilized by the clients that are involved in the program. So we have started with that. We have not completed a cohort yet, but it is up and running and it seems to be going very well. We have expended probably about $2,500 of the $17,000 that we were granted, and anticipate that that will be expended by the end of September. And we look forward to providing the data from our program to you and to the grantor. And that has already begun. We'll be doing monthly reports forward on how the program is progressing. And in conjunction, actually, too, we are doing some collection of data about super utilizers through the system that cycle through the hospitals, the prison and jail, and are looking at how these types of interventions might help to assist with intervening in that cycle. So I'm happy to answer any questions about where we are with that program and the goals. And we appreciate your allowing us the opportunity to have this program in our system.
Thank you, Dr. Neighbors. Are there any questions for Dr. Neighbors on her presentation? All right, seeing none, I'd like to extend my thanks and appreciation to all of the presenters and the update of their use of the subawards. Probably not for the September meeting, but the meeting following that. I think it would be useful for the commission to get an overview of the outcomes from each of those who received subawards. So maybe in November or thereabouts, we can, whenever that meeting is, we can get updates with respect to the outcomes. Some of those presentations will be a lot shorter than others. I think we know where we are in the policy, the sentencing policy department. But I'm intrigued, I'm sure other commission members are, with respect to the work product that Dr. Neighbors mentioned, Ms. Noble mentioned, the NDOC folks have identified, and obviously as well as posts. So all of those would be very informative going forward. If there's any issues regarding invoicing for the remaining balance, please contact Abigail Straight at CJI. She'll assist with respect to those invoicing needs if people have them, or with Victoria, she can help make those arrangements. So with that, let's open up agenda item 8. We're making great progress here today, and I know other people have legislative demands and duties, so I wanted to try to get the meeting completed if we could. So we'll trudge on. As you all recall from our last commission meeting, I shared with you that I had been contacted by CJI and BJA regarding a potential opportunity, quite frankly, I think unique to Nevada, that would give us an analysis and an understanding of the short and long-term impact of COVID-19 on Nevada's criminal justice system, as well as circling back on the assumptions that were used and studying the assumptions that were used to help develop AB 236. We were fortunate enough to secure the support of BJA to pursue this matter. And so I have asked the representatives of the Crime and Justice Institute to provide us with a update and outline of how they intend to proceed and what work they've been doing since this authorization was provided. So let me introduce Mr. Weld, and for those of us who sat through the various processes that developed AB 236. Maura McNamara, it's always good to have her back and join us. And they are joined by Dr. Molly Buchanan as well from CJI. So welcome to all of you, and I'll invite you to begin with your presentation.
Thank you, Chair Hardesty, Vice Chair Callaway, and Director Gonzalez. We wish we were there in Carson City to present to the full commission, but we're nonetheless honored to be here today presenting to this body about this new opportunity to study the impact of COVID-19 on Nevada's justice system. I'm going to go through about 30 slides today. I'm going to go off camera for those, but I'll be back at the end for as many questions as the commission has for our team. So just give me one moment. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So I'm going to start with an outline of the information I intend to present today. I think it's important to say right off the bat, you're not going to hear any results or findings today. This is intended as an overview to introduce the project to the Sentencing Commission. There will be a few data slides at the end, but they're based on publicly available data that I think this body has heard in certain forms before. So I'm going to start by giving some background on our organization and discuss the origins of this effort. Then I'll give an overview of the planned project work, which will include both a quantitative and qualitative component. We'll give some examples of policies from around the US that arose from the unforeseen and unprecedented event of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I mentioned, I'll present some limited preliminary data from Nevada, and we'll finally discuss the project timeline and next steps. And then at the end, we'll take questions. So first, a little bit of information about our organization and the work that we do. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan that works with states and localities across the US. We use data analysis to support these jurisdictions as they pursue policies to reduce recidivism, safely reduce unneeded costs, and enhance public safety. So CJI has done and is still doing other work in Nevada, as has been mentioned in today's meeting. We worked for the ACAJ in 2018 to staff that body as it conducted a comprehensive study of the state's prison population. The ACAJ then recommended responsive policy options that resulted in the passage of AB 236 in 2019. Since 2019, a team from CJI has been working with agencies across the state to implement the changes contained in AB 236. And my colleagues from that team have presented to this commission in the past. I think it's important to note that this current project is distinct from that implementation work, in that this project is primarily focused on the impact of the pandemic on Nevada's criminal justice system. So now getting in a little bit to the planned project work and an overview of that. So state leadership has asked CJI to evaluate the general impact of the pandemic on Nevada's criminal justice system and its specific impact on the prison population. This comes as no cost to the state. It's funded by a public-private partnership between the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the Pew Charitable Trusts. And the project has three stated goals. The first and I think primary goal is to better understand the impact of the pandemic on the state's prison population specifically and criminal justice system generally. The second is to identify any gaps and opportunities for post-pandemic policies and practices. And the third is to revise prison population projections where necessary. So this is an overview of the project phases. The first two, the data analysis and system assessment, will happen simultaneously. I'll get into each of those in a bit more detail on later slides. Following the data analysis and system assessment, we will attempt to create revised projections for the prison population based on any changes that we see in the data we analyze. Then, based on the results of the previous work, we will identify any policy opportunities that may exist moving forward. In November, we'll deliver a report to state leaders and to this body that includes the information from all of these phases. So a little bit more detail on the data analysis work. To understand the impact of the pandemic, we'll be looking at raw data from key agencies in the state. This includes state level agencies like the DOC, the AOC, the NPP, and the Records Division, and local entities like law enforcement and local courts. During this work, we'll be looking for trends in both aggregate and individual level data. The metrics may include, but aren't limited to, admissions, lengths of stay, releases, population snapshots, demographics, offense types, revocations, and case processing time. So overview now of the system assessment part of it, which will be happening at the same time. In addition to the data analysis, we'll be doing a deep dive into key areas to understand what policies and practices may have changed during the pandemic, what stayed the same, and what changes are likely to persist. We've already heard from many folks around the state, including commissioners of the Sentencing Commission, about the incredible flexibility and innovation that pretty much every criminal justice agency in Nevada has had to implement to respond to the pandemic. And we'll be doing much more of that. So some of the areas this assessment will focus on include policing, prosecution, court processes and sentencing, community supervision, and prison releases. The methodology for the system assessment will include a review of state laws, executive and administrative orders, written policy, appellate cases, and court reviews, as these are the primary mechanisms in which different policies were enacted or revised. In addition to the review of written material, as I mentioned, we'll be conducting interviews to become aware of changed practices that weren't necessarily captured in writing and understand how things worked on the ground during last year and into this year. And then finally, we plan to conduct surveys and focus groups and observe court where possible to get an even broader picture. So now that I've given a little bit of a description of the intended project work, we wanted to just identify a couple of national trends that have been seen really across the country as to how policies have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The first example of where these policies changed is law enforcement, obviously was greatly impacted. The pandemic necessitated in some places a reduction of in-person contact for certain situations, which coupled with high staff sick rates saw many departments shrink their physical footprint out of necessity. Some states intentionally reduced the frequency of community contact to protect the health and safety of their officers and the community. Others increased their use of citations in lieu of arrest. And many states limited enforcement of certain types of conduct, such as traffic licensing offenses, for example. Another area which of course changed greatly was court process. As everyone here is aware, the fundamental change across the country and in Nevada was a massive transition away from in-person hearings to virtual court and remote hearings. Another big one here is many jurisdictions enacted policies to limit pretrial detention for certain offenses, including strong new presumptions for some low-level crimes. Finally, many states saw significant inevitable delays in case dispositions arising from court closures, mass continuances, or needing to limit certain types of hearings, for example, jury trials. So ways in which existing incarcerated populations were impacted. We heard a lot about this from Director Daniels earlier. Here are some additional policies. Some examples here include releasing vulnerable people appropriate for release by medical or geriatric parole mechanisms. Some states issued commutation orders for those serving for certain classes of nonviolent offenses. Another was the release of individuals who happened to be particularly close to their parole eligibility date. And to create the needed separation, some states were creative and housed individuals at previously closed or vacant facilities for certain purposes. And then finally, many departments stopped all transfers of individuals. So the last area I'll discuss, where a lot of policy change happened, was of course community supervision. There was a sudden need to limit in-person contact, which led to changes in the way parolees and probationers are supervised. This included changes like the adoption of remote reporting tools and the closure of many community-based supports. So those were an example of some of the policy impacts that the pandemic had. The last section here is just a couple of data slides indicating what we know so far about what happened in the last calendar year or so. Double data in Nevada. So first, the prison population is declining, which mirrors what is happening nationwide. Nevada's prison population has dropped around 18% from 2019 through 2021. It isn't pictured on this slide, but we know that with regards to Nevada, this reduction has been driven primarily by a decline in admissions and not an increase in releases. The next slide, I think, provides a good idea of why this project is intended to include a revision of prison population projections. The green line here is the projected NDOC population, and the blue line is the actual numbers reported by the NDOC during the past few years, which, as you can see, is considerably lower and gets lower as time goes on. Projections always carry some degree of uncertainty, but as you can see from this graph, the unprecedented effects of the pandemic threw off projections more than normal, completely understandably. So one of the goals of this project is to revise those projections so the state and this body can have a better idea of what the population will look like during the coming years. When looking at prison data, particularly in the context of admissions, it's critical to also have an understanding of general current crime trends. Here's a quick and by no means exhaustive snapshot of recent data there. On this slide, we can see that Nevada's crime rates have generally dropped during the pandemic, which mirrors the national trend during the same period. It's worth noting that this slide only displays UCR reported data of property and violent crime. A drug crime is not displayed on this slide. So the top three lines here show the overall declines in LVMPD, Nevada state, and national property crime rates. The bottom three lines represent violent crime in the same three jurisdictions. In the US overall, as shown by that lowest blue line, it's hard to see, but violent crime increased nationally. Data that's been reported by the LVMPD indicates that violent crime overall went down in Las Vegas or in their jurisdiction, but homicides and aggravated assaults went up. As 2020 patterns continue to reveal themselves, they'll require close attention as numbers are finalized and this data is made available. So the last data slide is about parole population. COVID-19 has not only impacted prison population, but also community supervision populations. When looking at averages, the average parole population in 2020 grew 17% since 2019. This data is from the NDOC weekly fact sheets. We don't necessarily yet know what caused this bump. This is just an example of an early finding that we're going to try and find out more about. So finally, I want to conclude with the project timeline and discuss next steps that this commission can expect. So here's the overall timeline of our project. As you can see, the main deliverable is a report that will be submitted in November of 2021. We anticipate presenting to the Sentencing Commission at least a few times before that date. So next steps, we'll be reaching out to many of you as part of the data analysis and system assessment. We're already in touch with many of the agencies that we expect to get data from. The success of this project, I do think, will depend on the participation and referrals of as many practitioners and experts as possible, including those on this body. And yeah, we really look forward to speaking with as many of you as we can. In the final report, we'll include both the data analysis and the system assessment and any projections or policy recommendations, and will be published in November. These are our contacts. I believe you have our information in this presentation that was sent to you, but please reach out really whenever you want to discuss anything about this project. So I will stop there for questions and can return to any slides as needed as they come up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weld. I appreciate your summary of the activities over the next several months. Are there any questions from commissioners with regard to this effort? I'm not sure if hands are raised or not. We'll have to.
He needs to stop sharing.
Yeah, you'll need to stop sharing the slides, Mr. Weld, and then we can get a full view of the members of the commission. Mr. Hicks, did you? Yes, you had your hand up. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Justice Hardesty. Mr. Weld, I just had one question, and we kind of hit on it when you and I already spoke. But in addition to the dramatic impact that we all understand of the pandemic on the criminal justice system, there were two major changes in our criminal justice system in Nevada that I also think or hope that you guys are able to balance with your examination. And that is, as you guys are well familiar of AB 236, which one of the expected impacts of that is a decrease in the prison population. We all know that from our prior work on it. But that actually happened to come into effect in Nevada right in the middle of the pandemic on July 1st of 2020. And so starting on that date, that significant shift in our criminal justice system, which reclassified certain felonies, made probation more likely in many cases, made specialty courts more likely in many cases, and in turn, prison population less likely, or an increase of it. I feel like that really needs to be balanced in this examination. And I don't know, I'm sure it's very difficult to do, but you guys are great at what you do. So I just wanted to offer that up. The other significant change in our criminal justice system was a decision called Valdez-Jimenez, which significantly changed the way bail is addressed in the state of Nevada. And speaking for at least in Washoe County, we have seen an increase of failure to appears for court hearings and reoffending due to some release decisions that were made that are different than how they were done before. And so that came into effect in April of 2020. And so when you see those, at least what we're encountering here, you see those failure to appears increase or reoffense increase. It tends to slow the system down a little bit. And I can only, as I say, speak of just general experience here that may be leading to a slower admission into prison if that is happening. So I just encourage you all to look closely at those, because those were significant changes without COVID as you're doing this analysis. Thank you.
For the record, Quentin Weld from CJI. Thank you, DA Hicks. I think it's a really crucial point. As you mentioned, there are a couple of things that happened in 2020 that would have, even absent the pandemic, had a major effect on the prison population and other parts of the system. And you reference AB 236 and also the Valdez-Jimenez decision and the practices that followed that decision. And we certainly will be taking those into account, looking at how those early pretrial hearings, as they started to happen, in a pandemic affected landscape. And definitely will, to our best of our abilities, take both of those changes into account and also keep an eye on bills that are currently pending in the Nevada legislature, which may have additional impact on those things that you mentioned. So thanks for that comment. I think it's really important.
Thank you.
If I could add to that discussion, this is Justice Hardesty. It is abundantly clear that the district courts and limited jurisdiction courts are backlogged severely. Jury trials were minimal throughout 2020 and even the first part of 2019, which impacted adversely decisions that might have led to an increase in the prison population, or for that matter, parole and probation supervision, because cases would have been adjudicated. It also slowed dramatically the plea bargain process so that there weren't dispositions, and a number of cases, I believe, were detained or held in the justice courts and didn't get to the district courts. And so I suspect that that's a dynamic that would contribute to the slowing of the process of the resolution of criminal cases. So I don't know that the bail or the change in the way detention decisions are made is, yes, it's a factor, but not being able to get those cases to court is a significant factor. As I reported to the legislature in March of this year, as of March 11th, in Clark County alone, there were over 1,400 criminal cases, felony cases set for trial that couldn't be tried. 252 capital cases set for trial couldn't be tried. And over 180 defendants who had invoked their right to trial within 60 days that couldn't get to court. And those numbers are not nearly as big as in Washoe as they are in Clark, but they're still out of normal by a significant amount. That'll begin to clear out. Unfortunately, it's going to take, I think, a fair amount of time for the court system to get its courtrooms in a position and have venues where they can entertain jury trials. Beginning June 14th, for example, in Clark County, they will begin calling veneers for jury trials in criminal cases every hour, and start assigning those cases out. But there are challenges throughout the state to be able to get those jury trials commenced. In Washoe County, a building that is serviced by 2 elevators, one of those elevators is going to be shut down for the next 6 or 7 months. So there are factors that are impacting the delay in jury trials that have nothing whatsoever to do with the impact or the pandemic, but have a lot to do with the structures that these venues are occupying. So there's a lot of factors that are slowing the criminal justice system down and are slowing the input of individuals coming into both parole and probation for supervision, as well as incarceration in the Nevada Department of Corrections. Who would have thought that we would begin working on elevators as we transition out of the pandemic and slow it even down further? And I think that problem, by the way, exists in Clark County's Regional Justice Center as well. So there's lots of factors that implicate this, and I'm sure that CJI will be able to footnote their report with non-pandemic related delays in the criminal justice system as they work forward. Are there any other questions or comments by commissioners for the team from CJI? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Well. Ms. McNamara, always great to see you again. And Dr. Buchanan, thank you for being present today. We appreciate your effort and we are sincerely appreciative of BJA and the Pew Charitable Trust for making available your services once again for our work going forward. Let's briefly discuss future meetings. The next meeting under agenda item 9 for the commission will be September 3rd. As the director noted, we will have to have reappointments from appointing authorities. And there'll be probably some of the commission members will be returning. Other commission members will be new. On the September 3rd meeting as well, will be an agenda item to select the chair of the commission. The chair serves for a 2-year period. So the commission will need to select the chair on September 3rd as well. With that said, let's turn now to public comment under item number 10. I'll open the second period of public comment. As we did in the first period, those who wish to testify may do so by telephone. Unfortunately, we limit public comment to 2 minutes. So for any of you who haven't been able to provide as much in the way of public comment as you'd like to do so, you are invited and welcome to offer additional testimony in writing to the Department of Sentencing Policy at the sentencing policy at ndsp.nv.gov. Ms. Buckley, if you'd like to open up the second period of public comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hardesty. Members of the public who would like to testify by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. When it is your turn to speak, please slowly state and spell your first and last name. Caller with ID number 405. Please unmute yourself and slowly state and spell your name for the record. Again, caller with the last 3 digits, 405. Please unmute yourself, slowly state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Sam Gordon, Samgordon. I have 2 quick comments. The first one is for Ms. Wellborn with the ACLU. I greatly appreciate you representing ACLU today in this meeting and your participation in it. In reviewing the public comments, I read those online. I noticed that about 40% concerned AB 236, specifically the retroactivity of it. This applied to inmates of various backgrounds and convictions and their families. And I ask you, Ms. Wellborn, that you take these public comments back to ACLU and view them with this potential action in mind. In response to the officer's request for more information, and I do apologize, I did not catch his name. In an experimental study done by Edkins and Durkin, over half of their subjects acquiesced to a plea bargain, even when known to be innocent. At this time, over 96% of the U.S. population takes a plea bargain. I would like for the research he requested to include defendants who retained a statement of innocence, even though they acquiesced to a plea bargain due to physical, mental, and/or financial exhaustion, or a fear of a much harsher sentence when told they would be found guilty even when they retained a statement of innocence. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
If there are any other callers for public comment, please raise your hand, unmute your phone, and slowly state and spell your name for the record. Justice Hardesty, there are no more callers and I have no emails in our system.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Buckley. With that, we will proceed to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Justice Hardesty, I apologize. I wanted to just make a quick comment to the caller if they're still on the line, or to Ms. Gonzalez, that if I could get the contact information for that caller, if at all possible, I would appreciate that so we can follow up on our intake process. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wellborn. I believe Mr. McCormick made a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. Justice, or Mr. Callaway has done so as well. So we are, all those in favor, please raise your hand if you would, please. I think we can view everybody. Is there anyone who is opposed? All right, unanimous to adjourn. Thanks to the staff again for an outstanding meeting and for all the work that went into the preparation of today's meeting. We really appreciate it. We are adjourned. Thank you.